Hello, my friend, and welcome. Tonight, we're not here to witness the great battles of Zeus, the heroic journeys of Odysseus, or the terrifying gaze of Medusa. Instead, we're going somewhere almost no mortal was ever meant to see. Beyond the clouds, high above the mountains of ancient Greece, lies a hidden world where the Olympian gods lived their ordinary lives when history wasn't watching. What did Zeus do before the first thunder echoed across the sky? Where did Athena spend the quiet hours of dawn? Why did Apollo greet each sunrise with music long before the world awakened? As the stars slowly fade and the first golden light touches Mount Olympus, settle into a comfortable place. Let your thoughts drift like the ancient clouds, and together we'll quietly step beyond the gates of the gods, into the hidden lives they never expected mortals to discover. Long before the first light of morning touched the distant shores of Greece, there was a quiet hour that belonged to almost no one. It was a moment suspended between night and dawn, when the world seemed to pause and even time itself moved with gentle patience. Far below, villages slept beneath woven blankets of darkness. The last lamps had burned low, shepherds rested beside their quiet flocks, and fishing boats rocked softly against silent harbors, waiting for the sea to awaken with the coming day. But high above those peaceful lands, far beyond the tallest forests, above snow-covered peaks, and hidden among drifting clouds, stood a place unlike any other in the ancient world, Mount Olympus. To the people of Greece, it was more than a mountain. It was the invisible heart of the heavens, where marble palaces gleamed beneath an eternal sky, and where the Olympian gods watched over the ever-changing lives of mortals below. By daylight, poets imagined Olympus as a place filled with dazzling splendor, brilliant feasts, and voices powerful enough to shake the earth itself. Yet before sunrise, before prayers echoed from temples, before kings sought guidance, and before heroes began their legendary journeys, Olympus belonged to silence. The mountain breathed with a calm rhythm known only to the gods. A cool breeze wandered through long rows of white marble columns, carrying the delicate fragrance of wild thyme, mountain pine, and ancient olive leaves. Crystal water slipped quietly from carved stone fountains into still pools that reflected thousands of fading stars. Nothing hurried, nothing demanded attention. Even the wind seemed careful not to disturb the peaceful halls that rested beneath the pale glow of the moon. Golden braziers still burned outside the great palaces, though their flames had softened into gentle amber light. Their warmth touched polished stone floors that had welcomed gods, goddesses, nymphs, and messengers for countless generations. At this quiet hour, the great halls were nearly empty. The echoes of yesterday had long faded. The voices of celebration had fallen silent. Only the distant whisper of flowing water remained. If a traveler could somehow have climbed beyond the mortal world and reached these sacred heights before dawn, they might have expected to find the rulers of heaven surrounded by endless luxury and constant celebration. Instead, they would have discovered something far more surprising: peace. The hidden life of Olympus was not always filled with grand speeches or magnificent miracles. Like the changing seasons below, the home of the gods followed its own gentle rhythm. There were quiet mornings, unhurried conversations, thoughtful walks through gardens scented with laurel and rosemary, moments of reflection beside clear mountain springs, long stretches of silence that no ancient poet ever chose to describe. Those were the moments that history almost forgot. Above the eastern horizon, the sky slowly began to change. The deepest shades of midnight blue softened into muted indigo. Then came a delicate ribbon of silver stretching across the horizon, so faint that it almost disappeared into the lingering darkness. The stars did not vanish all at once. One by one, they quietly surrendered their places to the coming dawn, as though each carried an ancient understanding that morning always arrived without haste. The gardens surrounding the palaces remained perfectly still. Olive trees, older than the memories of many kingdoms, stood with twisted trunks and silvery leaves that shimmered softly whenever the breeze passed through them. Nearby, white doves rested upon marble statues dedicated to peace and wisdom. None had yet taken flight. Even the birds seemed content to wait. Farther along a winding pathway of polished stone, slender cypress trees lined the edge of a quiet terrace overlooking the sleeping world below. From there, the entire land of Greece stretched into the distance. Rivers reflected the stars. Forests appeared as dark waves rolling across the valleys. Tiny villages rested beneath gentle blankets of mist. The sea, calm and endless, caught the moonlight like polished silver. From such heights, the worries of mortals seemed impossibly small. Wars that felt endless below became little more than distant whispers. Arguments between kings disappeared beneath the clouds. The ambitions of great cities faded into silence. Only the earth itself remained, patient, beautiful, unchanging. This was the view the gods had known for ages beyond counting. Not every hour upon Olympus was filled with judgment or celebration. Many began exactly like this, in quiet observation, in stillness, in gratitude for another day about to unfold. As the first pale light touched the highest stones of the mountain, something almost imperceptible began to change. Not a great thunder, not a blazing miracle, only the gentle awakening of a place that had never truly slept. Somewhere deep within the peaceful halls of Olympus, a single bronze door opened with the softest whisper. The hidden day of the gods was about to begin. The gentle sound of the bronze door faded almost as quickly as it had begun. No great trumpet announced the arrival of the king of Olympus. No brilliant flash of lightning split the peaceful sky. There was only the quiet rhythm of footsteps upon polished marble. Long before the first prayers rose from the temples of Greece, Zeus was already awake. For countless generations, poets had described him as the mighty ruler whose thunder could shake mountains and whose voice carried across the heavens. Those stories were true, but they were not the whole story. Very few spoke of the peaceful hours that came before the first storm cloud ever gathered. Those belonged to another Zeus, a quieter Zeus, one known only to the endless mornings of Mount Olympus. He stepped onto an open terrace overlooking the sleeping world below. His long robe, woven in soft shades of ivory and deep blue, moved gently in the cool mountain breeze. Upon his shoulders rested a simple cloak embroidered with delicate patterns of stars, a reminder that even the ruler of the heavens lived beneath the same ancient sky as every other god. There was no crown upon his head this morning. No eagle circled above him. No thunderbolt rested in his hand. Only silence kept him company. The eastern horizon had begun to glow with the faintest trace of gold. Far below, the villages of Greece remained wrapped in peaceful darkness. Smoke had not yet begun to rise from stone chimneys. Fishing boats still floated quietly inside sheltered harbors. Olive groves rested beneath silver mist. Even the restless sea seemed content to wait for morning. Zeus leaned gently against the smooth marble railing. From this height, the world appeared astonishingly calm. It was easy for mortals to imagine that the ruler of Olympus spent every hour deciding the fate of kingdoms. The truth was far gentler. Each morning began not with judgment, but with observation. For a long while, Zeus simply watched. He watched the clouds drift across distant mountains. He watched moonlight slowly surrender to dawn. He watched rivers winding through valleys where generations of families would soon awaken to another ordinary day. There was wisdom in watching before speaking. There was understanding in listening before acting. The oldest gods had always known that the world revealed its greatest truths during its quietest moments. A cool breeze carried the fragrance of pine forests from the lower slopes of Olympus. Mixed with it came the delicate scent of flowering thyme growing between ancient stones. Nearby, clear water flowed through narrow marble channels, feeding small gardens that surrounded the royal palace. White lilies floated peacefully upon still pools. Olive branches swayed with gentle grace. Tiny sparrows had begun to stir among the hedges, though none had yet found the courage to sing. Morning preferred patience. Zeus smiled almost imperceptibly. He knew these gardens better than any poet ever could. Every tree had grown beneath his watch. Every pathway had welcomed centuries of quiet conversations. Every fountain remembered stories that no mortal had lived long enough to hear. Many imagined Olympus as a place forever filled with celebration. Yet much of its beauty lived inside these peaceful hours. A gardener carefully trimmed climbing vines from a marble archway. A pair of attendants refreshed bowls of spring water beside the palace entrance. Farther down the terrace, two young nymphs gathered fallen olive leaves into woven baskets while speaking in voices so soft they seemed part of the morning breeze itself. No one hurried. No one raised their voice. There was time enough for every task. Zeus believed that order was strongest when it arrived without force. The first true beam of sunlight finally appeared above the eastern mountains. It stretched across the valleys below before slowly climbing toward Olympus itself. One by one, the white columns of the palace caught the warm golden light. Their polished surfaces glowed like quiet fire. The mountain was waking, not suddenly, but gently, as it always had. From somewhere beyond the gardens came the distant melody of flowing water cascading over smooth stone. A pair of white doves lifted into the brightening sky, circling once above the palace before disappearing toward the sacred olive groves. The air had begun to warm ever so slightly. The long night was giving way to another timeless day. Zeus closed his eyes for a brief moment, not to sleep, but to listen. Far below, he could almost hear the first signs of life returning to Greece. A shepherd opening the gate to a hillside pasture. The faint splash of an oar touching quiet water. A baker preparing the first loaf before sunrise. The soft laughter of a child waking earlier than expected. These were ordinary moments, small enough that history would never record them. Yet together they formed the heartbeat of the world. The gods protected kingdoms and seas, but it was ordinary lives that gave those kingdoms meaning. The hidden mornings of Olympus always began with that quiet reminder. Power was never measured only by thunder. Sometimes it was measured by restraint, by patience, by choosing silence when silence was enough. Zeus opened his eyes once more. The sunlight now reached the highest terrace, bathing the palace in gentle gold. Another day had begun. Soon the halls would welcome familiar footsteps. Athena would leave her quiet study with fresh ideas gathered from a peaceful night of reflection. Apollo would greet the growing light with music that seemed to drift across the sky itself. Hermes would begin another journey along roads known to both gods and mortals. The laughter of distant conversations would slowly return to the marble courtyards. Olympus would awaken completely, but not yet. For one final peaceful moment, the king of the gods remained alone upon the terrace, watching the world below breathe itself awake beneath the first light of dawn. And as the sunlight spread across the mountain, another gentle door opened somewhere within the palace. The quiet kingdom of Hera was beginning to stir. As the first warmth of dawn spread across the eastern face of Mount Olympus, the quiet palace of Hera slowly welcomed the morning. Unlike the grand halls where Zeus watched the awakening world, Hera's home rested behind graceful colonnades and peaceful gardens that seemed to bloom in every season. Marble pathways curved gently through groves of cypress, myrtle, and flowering laurel, leading to courtyards where fountains sang softly from sunrise until long after the stars appeared each evening. Very few stories told by mortal poets ever lingered here. They remembered Hera as the queen of the gods, the protector of marriage, the guardian of sacred vows, and sometimes the fierce defender of her honor. Yet those legends revealed only the moments when the world demanded her attention. They rarely spoke of the quiet mornings. The mornings belonged only to Olympus. The palace doors stood open, welcoming the cool mountain breeze inside. Thin curtains of finely woven linen drifted gently with every passing breath of wind, allowing ribbons of golden light to dance across polished marble floors. Everything seemed peaceful. Nothing hurried the beginning of the day. Long before servants arrived with fresh spring water or baskets filled with figs, grapes, warm bread, and fragrant honey, Hera often preferred to walk alone through her gardens. She believed that gardens taught patience. No flower could be rushed into bloom. No tree hurried its branches toward the sky. Every growing thing understood that beauty arrived quietly, one season at a time. She stepped onto a narrow stone path bordered by white lilies whose petals still carried tiny drops of morning dew. As she passed, the gentle fragrance of jasmine mixed with the cool scent of fresh mountain air. Nearby, a family of white peacocks wandered freely beneath olive trees whose silver leaves shimmered beneath the rising sun. The magnificent birds did not fear the Queen of Olympus. They had known her gentle footsteps for ages beyond counting. One magnificent peacock slowly unfolded its brilliant tail, not as a display of pride, but almost as if greeting another beautiful morning upon the mountain. Hera paused. A small smile appeared upon her face. Many imagined that the Queen of Heaven ruled only through majesty and command. Few imagined her quietly admiring the changing colors hidden inside a single feather. She reached out with careful hands, allowing the curious bird to step closer. For several peaceful moments, neither moved. The world below was beginning to awaken. Yet here, time still flowed with remarkable calm. Beyond the garden stood a circular courtyard surrounded by graceful columns carved with vines, pomegranates, and blooming roses. In its center rested an ancient fountain whose waters had flowed since the earliest days of Olympus. Clear mountain water rose from polished white stone before falling into a wide reflecting pool as smooth as glass. Hera often visited this place before speaking to anyone else. The fountain reflected the brightening sky. Soft clouds drifted across its surface. For an instant, the heavens appeared both above and below. The queen lowered herself onto a marble bench warmed by the first touch of sunlight. She listened, not for voices, not for prayers, only for the gentle sounds that surrounded her every morning. The fountain, the breeze, the rustling olive leaves, the distant song of awakening birds. These quiet melodies reminded her that harmony was not created through power alone. It was created through balance. Throughout Greece, countless families would soon gather around simple wooden tables to begin another ordinary day. Children would laugh, parents would prepare food, neighbors would greet one another beneath the warm Mediterranean sun. Hera thought of those unseen homes with quiet affection. The greatest temples built in her honor were magnificent, but it was the ordinary households, the places where promises were kept, kindness was shared, and love quietly endured, that reflected her gifts most faithfully. Not every blessing arrived with celebration. Some arrived with breakfast prepared before sunrise, with patient forgiveness, with gentle words spoken after difficult days. Such moments rarely found their way into epic poems, yet they were no less sacred. As sunlight spread farther across the palace grounds, attendants quietly appeared from nearby corridors. They carried woven baskets filled with fresh flowers gathered from Olympus itself. Without speaking above a whisper, they arranged white lilies, blue irises, crimson poppies, and delicate violets inside graceful bronze vessels placed throughout the palace. No command was given. Each servant already understood the peaceful rhythm of the queen's morning. A young nymph carefully polished the marble edges of the reflecting pool until they shone like still water beneath the growing light. Another refreshed small bowls of fragrant olive oil used to scent the halls. Everything was performed with quiet purpose. There was dignity even in the smallest task. From somewhere beyond the gardens came the soft cooing of doves nesting beneath the roof of a nearby pavilion. The sound echoed gently between the marble columns before disappearing into the fresh morning air. Hera looked toward the eastern sky once more. The sun had climbed higher now. Golden light spilled across Olympus, touching every palace, every pathway, every sacred tree. Soon Athena would leave her library. Apollo's music would begin to drift across the mountain. Hermes would prepare for another day's journey among gods and mortals alike. Olympus would slowly fill with familiar voices. But these first quiet moments belonged only to the queen. They reminded her that true strength was often gentle, that lasting beauty asked for patience, and that even upon the highest mountain in the world, peace was carefully tended, just like the smallest flower growing beside a quiet garden path. As Hera rose from the marble bench, the breeze carried a faint new sound across the palace grounds. It was not the song of birds, nor the whisper of flowing water. It was the soft turning of parchment pages somewhere beyond the olive groves. Deep within another quiet corner of Olympus, Athena had already begun her morning among scrolls, wisdom, and the first thoughts of a brand new day. The gentle rustle of parchment drifted through the still morning air, like the whisper of autumn leaves. It came from a quiet corner of Mount Olympus, where the sound of celebration rarely reached, and where silence was treasured as deeply as gold. Here stood the House of Wisdom. Unlike the magnificent halls where feasts were held, or the terraces where the gods gathered beneath the open sky, Athena's home possessed a quieter kind of grandeur. Its beauty did not demand attention. It invited contemplation. Tall marble columns, carved with graceful olive branches and delicate owls, surrounded a series of peaceful courtyards. Small streams of crystal-clear spring water wound between smooth white stones before disappearing beneath flowering vines that climbed gracefully along ancient walls. Every path seemed to lead toward another garden. Every doorway opened into another room filled with light, and every quiet corner held the comforting feeling that someone, somewhere, had once paused there simply to think. The morning sun had only just begun to reach the eastern windows when Athena entered the great library. Golden light poured gently through tall openings framed by polished marble, settling across shelves lined with carefully arranged scrolls collected over countless generations. There were no piles of forgotten parchment, no scattered records. Everything rested exactly where it belonged. Order, Athena believed, was another form of kindness. When knowledge could be found with ease, wisdom could be shared without delay. The air carried the faint scent of papyrus, cedarwood, beeswax, and freshly pressed olive oil used to preserve the smooth wooden shelves. It was a fragrance unlike any other place upon Olympus. Many mortals imagined that Athena spent every hour planning battles or advising kings. She certainly had. History remembered those moments well. But they were only a small part of her endless days. The quieter hours belonged to learning. She believed that every sunrise offered another opportunity to understand the world just a little more deeply than the day before. Athena walked slowly between the towering shelves. As her fingertips brushed the edges of neatly rolled scrolls, she smiled with quiet familiarity. Some told the stories of distant islands where gentle winds carried ships across peaceful seas. Others described the stars that wandered above the earth in patient circles each year. There were writings about architecture, music, farming, medicine, poetry, mathematics, and the careful art of building cities that could flourish for generations. No single subject stood above another. To Athena, every kind of honest knowledge held its own quiet value. Near the center of the library stood a wide circular table carved from a single piece of pale marble. Upon it rested a freshly drawn map of Greece. Tiny bronze markers identified mountain villages, sacred temples, rivers, forests, and bustling ports where merchants from distant lands would soon begin another day's journey. Athena paused beside the map. She did not look upon it as a queen surveying territory. She looked upon it as a teacher admiring a classroom still filled with possibility. Every village held children eager to learn. Every city sheltered artists who imagined new beauty. Every harbor welcomed travelers carrying stories from lands beyond the horizon. Wisdom, she often believed, traveled most freely when people remained curious. A soft flutter interrupted the silence. Perched upon a nearby olive branch that reached through an open window sat a snowy owl. Its bright eyes watched Athena with calm familiarity. The bird had visited the library for so many mornings that neither seemed surprised by the other's presence. Athena stepped closer. The owl remained perfectly still. Outside, the breeze stirred the silver leaves of the surrounding olive grove, filling the room with a quiet rustling that blended naturally with the turning pages of an open manuscript resting upon a nearby desk. For a few peaceful moments, neither goddess nor bird moved. There was no need. Some friendships required very few words. The silence itself had become a conversation. Beyond the library stretched one of Athena's favorite places on Olympus, an open courtyard surrounded by ancient olive trees. Their trunks were broad and weathered, shaped by centuries beyond counting, while their leaves shimmered softly beneath the growing light of morning. Stone benches rested beneath their shade. Clear water flowed gently through narrow channels cut into white marble. Small flowering herbs released delicate fragrances whenever the breeze passed by. This was where young gods, visiting nymphs, and the occasional wandering muse often gathered to ask questions. Not because Athena possessed every answer, but because she always welcomed thoughtful questions. She believed wisdom began long before answers were found. It began with curiosity. Some mornings she would spend hours beneath these trees, speaking not of wars or kingdoms, but of ordinary things. Why birds migrated with the changing seasons, how rivers slowly shaped valleys over countless years, why music could calm an anxious heart, how patience often achieved what force never could. These quiet lessons rarely appeared in the poems of great storytellers. Heroes preferred tales of monsters. Kings preferred tales of victory. Yet Athena knew that civilizations were built far more often by peaceful conversations than by glorious battles. As the sun climbed higher above Olympus, the library slowly filled with life. A pair of young nymphs entered carrying freshly copied scrolls tied neatly with blue ribbons. An elderly scribe carefully placed a new collection of poems upon one of the lower shelves before quietly bowing and returning to his work. Through the open windows came the cheerful songs of awakening birds. The mountain itself seemed brighter now. Somewhere in the distance, the gentle ringing of a bronze bell announced that another fountain had been opened to carry fresh spring water throughout the neighboring gardens. Olympus was waking one peaceful sound at a time. Athena gathered a single scroll from the table. Instead of remaining inside, she carried it into the olive garden where sunlight danced gently across the stone pathways. She settled upon a quiet bench beneath the oldest tree in the grove. There she began to read, not because duty required it, but because learning itself was one of life's quiet joys. Above her, the leaves shimmered softly. The owl closed its eyes for a brief moment. The breeze carried with it the scent of pine, thyme, and distant mountain flowers. It was, Athena thought, a beautiful morning to learn something new. Then, faintly at first, another sound drifted across Olympus. Not the turning of pages, not the whisper of leaves, a single clear note, soft, bright, warm as the first golden rays of the rising sun. It lingered in the air only for a heartbeat before another note joined it, followed by another, until a gentle melody floated gracefully above the marble rooftops. Athena lowered her scroll and smiled. Only one god welcomed every sunrise with music. Far beyond the olive groves, in a palace bathed in growing light, Apollo had begun to play his lyre, and with every quiet note, the morning itself seemed to awaken. The first notes of Apollo's lyre drifted across Mount Olympus, as gently as sunlight spreading over calm water. No command summoned the melody. No audience waited to applaud. The music simply arrived, as faithful to the morning as the rising sun itself. It floated above marble rooftops, slipped through quiet gardens, wandered among ancient olive trees, and echoed softly beneath graceful colonnades before disappearing into the endless blue sky. Every corner of Olympus seemed to recognize the familiar sound. White doves lifted from shaded courtyards without alarm. The fountains continued their gentle songs. Even the breeze appeared to slow, as though wishing to carry every note a little farther across the mountain. Apollo's palace stood upon the eastern side of Olympus, where the first rays of dawn always arrived before touching the homes of the other gods. Its walls were carved from warm ivory-colored marble that seemed almost to glow from within whenever morning light reached them. Golden columns surrounded broad terraces open to the sky. There were no heavy doors shutting out the world, no towering walls hiding the view. Apollo preferred open spaces where light, music, and fresh mountain air could wander freely together. A quiet stream flowed through the palace gardens before disappearing beneath a graceful stone bridge covered with climbing roses and blooming jasmine. Beyond it stretched gentle orchards filled with fig trees, laurel, and slender cypress whose dark green branches reached toward the brightening heavens. This was not merely a palace, it was a place where morning itself seemed to live. Apollo sat alone beneath a white marble pavilion overlooking the eastern horizon. Across his lap rested his beloved golden lyre, polished so carefully that the rising sunlight shimmered across its graceful frame. His fingers moved effortlessly across the strings. Each note flowed into the next without hurry. There was no beginning, no ending, only a melody that seemed to breathe with the mountain itself. Mortals often imagined Apollo as the radiant god who drove the light across the heavens, guided prophecy, inspired poets, healed the sick, and filled temples with sacred songs. All of those stories were true, yet few wondered what became of him before the world below had fully awakened. Those moments belonged only to Olympus. Apollo believed every sunrise deserved its own song, not because the sun required encouragement, but because gratitude was a beautiful way to begin any day. The melodies were never repeated. Each dawn carried its own colors, its own breeze, its own silence. And so each morning deserved music that had never existed before and would never be heard again. As he played, golden light slowly climbed across the marble floor beneath his feet. The shadows cast by the columns grew shorter with every passing moment. Tiny droplets of dew resting upon nearby flowers sparkled like scattered pearls. Honeybees began their patient work among lavender blossoms. A pair of swallows darted joyfully through the open courtyard before settling beneath the roof of the pavilion. Apollo smiled softly without interrupting the melody. Nature had always been his favorite audience. From somewhere within the palace came the quiet footsteps of several young muses. They did not speak. They knew better than to disturb the peaceful concert that welcomed every new day. Instead, each found a comfortable place beneath the surrounding trees or beside the nearby stream. Some carried scrolls, others held simple wooden flutes. One quietly sketched the morning landscape upon a smooth sheet of parchment. No lesson had been announced, yet learning often began simply by listening. The final note faded slowly into the fresh morning air. Silence returned, though it felt somehow richer than before. Apollo rested his hands upon the lyre and looked toward the distant coastline of Greece. The sea shimmered beneath the strengthening sunlight. Far below, fishermen were raising white sails that caught the gentle breeze. Thin ribbons of smoke curled upward from village hearths as families prepared the first meal of the day. Temple bells rang faintly across the valleys, welcoming another morning beneath the watchful gaze of Olympus. Apollo watched these ordinary scenes with quiet affection. The world was not made extraordinary only by miracles. It was made beautiful by ordinary mornings repeated through countless generations. A child learning a new song, an old storyteller greeting familiar neighbors, a healer preparing fresh herbs, a farmer walking peaceful fields before the summer heat arrived. These simple moments carried their own quiet kind of music. Rising from the pavilion, Apollo followed a winding garden path bordered by blooming rosemary and fragrant thyme. The stone beneath his sandals still held the coolness of the night. Along the way stood graceful statues honoring poets, musicians, physicians, and astronomers whose gifts had brought comfort rather than conquest. Apollo paused before one weathered statue depicting an elderly musician seated beneath an olive tree. Time had softened its carved features, yet the gentle expression remained. He brushed a few fallen leaves from its base. Even memories, he believed, deserved quiet care. Beyond the gardens lay a broad circular terrace where the morning sun now poured freely across polished marble. Here, the warmth of the day could already be felt. A clear spring bubbled from the hillside, filling a shallow basin where birds gathered to drink before continuing their flight across the mountain. Apollo knelt beside the water. Its surface reflected the brilliant blue sky above, broken only by the occasional ripple from a drifting leaf. For several peaceful moments, he simply watched the reflections dance. Wisdom had its place. Strength had its purpose. Justice guided kings. But beauty reminded every living soul that life was worth protecting. That was why music mattered. That was why poetry endured. That was why sunlight returned every morning without asking for praise. It offered itself freely, just as kindness should. A gentle breeze carried another familiar fragrance across the terrace. Not pine, not jasmine. Fresh cedar wood warmed by glowing embers. Apollo lifted his head. He knew that scent well. Somewhere beneath the western slopes of Olympus, where rivers of molten bronze illuminated endless halls of stone, another god had already begun his work. The steady ringing of a hammer echoed faintly through the mountain. Slow, measured, patient, Hephaestus was awake, and deep within his remarkable forge, the quiet craftsmanship of Olympus was about to begin. Apollo's final note lingered in the morning air, long after his fingers had left the strings of the lyre. The melody drifted across the marble terraces of Olympus, over quiet fountains and sunlit courtyards, until it reached the mountain's western forests. There, among towering pines and ancient silver firs, the music slowly dissolved into birdsong. It was almost as though the forest had accepted Apollo's gift and answered it in its own gentle language. This was where Artemis welcomed the day. Far from the grand halls of Olympus, her home rested within the oldest woodland upon the sacred mountain. No towering palace interrupted the landscape here. No endless rows of polished columns reached toward the heavens. Instead, nature itself formed her sanctuary. The towering trees became her pillars. The open sky became her ceiling. The streams became her fountains. And the forest, alive with quiet wonder, became her palace. Soft rays of morning sunlight slipped between the branches, painting golden patterns across the moss-covered earth. Tiny droplets of dew shimmered upon ferns like scattered crystals, while wildflowers nodded gently beneath the cool breeze. The air carried the comforting fragrance of pine resin, cedar bark, damp earth, and blooming mountain herbs. Every breath felt wonderfully fresh. Every sound belonged. A small herd of deer grazed peacefully in a sunlit meadow surrounded by tall trees. Nearby, 2 young foxes played among fallen leaves while a family of rabbits emerged cautiously from beneath a cluster of flowering shrubs. None of them feared the goddess. For countless generations, they had shared these woods with her gentle presence. Artemis walked quietly along a narrow forest path. Her silver-gray cloak moved softly behind her, brushing against wild grasses that lined the trail. A simple bow rested comfortably across her shoulder, though no arrow had yet left its quiver. Many stories remembered Artemis as the fearless huntress. They spoke of swift arrows, sacred animals, and adventures beneath the moon. Those tales were true, yet they often overlooked another part of her life. Most mornings, Artemis hunted nothing at all. She simply wandered. She believed a forest revealed its greatest beauty when one moved through it without disturbing its peaceful rhythm. The oldest oak trees greeted her like old friends. Mountain streams seemed to sing a little more brightly as she passed. Even the wind felt familiar. She paused beside a crystal-clear brook where smooth stones rested beneath water so transparent that every pebble could be seen upon the stream bed. A robin landed upon a nearby branch. Its cheerful song echoed softly through the trees. Soon another answered from farther away, then another. Within moments, the quiet forest became filled with gentle melodies. Artemis smiled. There was no orchestra upon Olympus more beautiful than the voices of a waking forest. She knelt beside the brook and allowed her fingertips to touch the cool water. Tiny circles spread across the surface before fading once again into perfect stillness. Above the stream, dragonflies glided effortlessly through shafts of golden sunlight. Their delicate wings shimmered with hints of blue and emerald whenever they turned. Nothing hurried them. The forest had no need for haste. As Artemis continued deeper beneath the pines, she reached a broad clearing surrounded by towering ancient trees. Here stood one of her favorite places upon the mountain. It was not a temple, nor a palace, only a circle of weathered stones covered in soft green moss. Wild lavender grew freely between them, filling the air with a sweet, calming fragrance. This was where she often sat to watch the seasons quietly change. Spring brought blossoms, summer filled the forest with birds and butterflies. Autumn covered the earth in golden leaves. Winter wrapped every branch in gentle snow. Each season possessed its own quiet beauty. None needed to resemble another. That lesson, Artemis often thought, was true for people as well. Nearby, a young fawn hesitated uncertainly beside the edge of the clearing. Its legs were still awkward with youth. It watched Artemis for several moments before taking a few careful steps closer. The goddess remained perfectly still. She knew trust could never be hurried. After a moment, the little deer lowered its head to nibble fresh clover growing between the stones. The forest had made another quiet choice. It had welcomed her once again. Far overhead, sunlight continued filtering through countless branches, filling the clearing with moving patches of gold that shifted gently whenever the breeze stirred the leaves. It was impossible to tell where light ended and shadow began. Everything blended together naturally, just as the world itself intended. Hours spent here never felt empty. Artemis listened to the rhythm of the woods, the tapping of a distant woodpecker, the whisper of squirrels gathering acorns, the steady murmur of flowing water, the soft flutter of butterflies drifting from flower to flower. Each sound belonged to a larger harmony. Many mortals believed silence meant the absence of sound. Artemis understood something different. True silence was not emptiness, it was balance. A place where every living thing spoke gently enough for the others to be heard. The morning slowly matured. Sunlight climbed higher through the forest canopy. Warmth replaced the lingering coolness of dawn. Above the treetops, a hawk circled peacefully upon rising currents of air before disappearing toward distant cliffs. Artemis followed its graceful flight until it became only a tiny shadow against the brilliant blue sky. Somewhere beyond these woods, Olympus was growing busier. The palace courtyards would soon fill with quiet conversations. Fresh bread would be carried through marble halls. Scrolls would be opened. Gardens would bloom beneath the strengthening sun. But here, the forest remained untouched by hurry. Artemis treasured that gift more than any jeweled crown. As she turned toward a narrow woodland trail leading down the mountain, another familiar sound reached her ears. Not birds, not flowing water. The faint ringing of tiny bronze bells fastened to a traveler's satchel. It was followed by light, confident footsteps upon an old stone road that wound between the forests and the valleys below. Artemis smiled knowingly. There was only one god upon Olympus whose mornings began with roads instead of palaces. Hermes had already begun another journey, carrying quiet messages between gods and mortals beneath the brightening skies of Greece. The gentle ringing of the bronze bells echoed through the pine forest before slowly fading into the warmth of the morning. Artemis remained still for a moment, listening with quiet amusement. She knew those bells well. They never hurried. They never startled the forest. They simply announced that somewhere nearby, the most faithful traveler on Olympus had already begun another peaceful day. Far below the snowy peaks, where mountain paths slowly descended toward the valleys of Greece, Hermes walked beneath a sky that had turned from pale gold to brilliant blue. Unlike the palaces of the Olympian gods, Hermes' home was never confined to a single place. Every road welcomed him. Every bridge recognized his footsteps. Every harbor, village, and mountain pass felt a little more familiar because he had crossed them countless times before. The open world itself was his palace. His cloak, woven from soft gray linen with a faint border of silver thread, moved lightly with every step. Fastened beside his shoulder hung a small leather satchel filled not with treasures, but with carefully rolled scrolls, wax tablets, tiny bundles of herbs, and letters tied with slender blue ribbons. Many of the messages he carried would never appear in history. Some offered thanks. Others simply wished an old friend good health. Hermes believed those were often the most important journeys of all. The mountain road curved gently around cliffs covered with wild rosemary and fragrant thyme. Sunlight spilled across smooth white stones polished by centuries of travelers. Tiny yellow flowers pushed bravely through narrow cracks in the ancient path, reminding every passerby that life had a remarkable way of appearing where least expected. Hermes slowed his pace. He was never in a race against the morning. Although poets celebrated his speed, they rarely spoke of his patience. A messenger who never noticed the world around him, Hermes often thought, carried only words. A messenger who truly observed the journey carried understanding. He paused beside an old olive tree whose twisted trunk had watched generations come and go. Its branches stretched gracefully over a simple stone bench overlooking the valley below. Hermes had rested here many times before. From this quiet place, he could see tiny villages waking beneath the growing sunlight. Smoke curled gently from chimneys. Goats wandered toward green hillsides. A baker swept flour from the doorway of a modest stone shop while neighbors greeted one another in calm, familiar voices. No one looked toward Olympus. No one imagined a god watched peacefully from the mountain above. Hermes smiled. He preferred it that way. The ordinary moments of mortal life deserved privacy. A soft breeze carried the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread upward through the valley. It mixed with the scent of pine, warm stone, and distant sea air arriving from the coast. The fragrance reminded Hermes that every region of Greece possessed its own quiet personality. The mountains smelled of cedar and snow. The valleys carried wheat and wild herbs. The coast welcomed salt, seaweed, and gentle ocean winds. Even before entering a village, one could often recognize it simply by breathing deeply. Continuing along the road, Hermes soon reached a graceful stone bridge arching over a clear mountain stream. The water below sparkled beneath the late morning sun, slipping around smooth pebbles before continuing toward the rivers of Greece. He stopped in the middle of the bridge. Travelers often hurried across bridges. Hermes rarely did. He leaned lightly against the weathered stone wall and watched several trout glide effortlessly through the transparent water. They moved without fear, without urgency. simply following the current wherever it gently carried them. There was wisdom in that, too. Not every destination needed to be forced. Some journeys unfolded naturally when one learned to trust the path beneath their feet. Beyond the bridge, the road widened into a small crossroads marked by an ancient stone pillar. Upon it rested a carefully carved image of winged sandals. Fresh sprigs of laurel and olive leaves had been placed there by passing travelers. Hermes touched the weathered stone with quiet gratitude. He never asked for grand monuments. Simple acts of kindness meant far more. Nearby, an elderly shepherd guided his sheep toward higher pasture. The old man paused for a moment to help a frightened lamb find its footing along the rocky path. Hermes watched silently. No thunder shook the heavens. No miracle announced itself. Yet the messenger god found something deeply beautiful in that small gesture. Great myths were remembered because they were extraordinary. Ordinary kindness quietly sustained the world between those stories. The sun climbed higher. The road became warmer beneath his sandals. Cicadas had begun their gentle chorus among the olive groves, while swallows darted gracefully overhead, tracing invisible patterns through the bright blue sky. Hermes continued walking. He greeted everyone he met with the same gentle smile. A potter carrying fresh clay, 2 children gathering figs, a fisherman repairing his nets beside a quiet stream. To most, he appeared only as another traveler upon the road, and that pleased him greatly. There was freedom in being unnoticed. There was wisdom in listening more than speaking. As noon slowly approached, Hermes reached a quiet hill overlooking endless fields of golden wheat swaying peacefully beneath the Mediterranean breeze. The harvest was still weeks away, yet every stalk already bent gracefully with the promise of abundance. He paused once more. The earth itself seemed to breathe here. Warm, patient, generous, a familiar feeling settled over the landscape. The scent of rich soil, fresh grain, wild poppies dancing among the fields. Hermes knew that fragrance well. He smiled toward the rolling countryside stretching beyond the horizon. These were the beloved lands of Demeter. Somewhere ahead, beneath the wide summer sky, the gentle goddess of the harvest was already walking among her fields, quietly preparing the earth for another season of life. And so the road carried him onward, leaving the mountain paths behind as the golden heart of Greece welcomed another peaceful day. By the time Hermes disappeared beyond the gentle rise of the hills, the morning had settled comfortably into the quiet warmth of late day. The mountain roads gave way to rolling fields. The cool scent of pine slowly faded, replaced by the rich fragrance of warm earth, ripening grain, wild chamomile, and freshly growing herbs carried upon a soft Mediterranean breeze. This was the peaceful realm of Demeter. Unlike the lofty marble palaces of Olympus or the shaded forests beloved by Artemis, Demeter found her greatest joy where life quietly emerged from the soil. To many mortals, she was known simply as the goddess of the harvest. Every loaf of bread, every field of wheat, every olive grove, every vineyard, every orchard heavy with fruit, all were gifts offered beneath her gentle care. Yet those who sang of her often remembered only the great myths, the changing seasons, the sorrow of separation, and the return of spring. They rarely imagined the countless ordinary mornings that filled the spaces between those legendary moments. Those mornings were among her favorites. Golden wheat stretched across the countryside like gentle waves upon a calm sea. Every breeze sent ripples through the endless fields, each one moving with quiet grace beneath the brilliant blue sky. Wild poppies painted delicate strokes of crimson among the grain. Small white daisies nodded softly beside narrow paths worn smooth by generations of careful footsteps. Honeybees drifted lazily from flower to flower, their quiet hum blending with the distant song of skylarks high above the fields. Nothing here demanded attention. Everything invited gratitude. Demeter walked slowly along a narrow earthen path lined with young olive trees. Her robes, woven in warm shades of ivory and soft green, moved gently around her ankles with every measured step. She carried no scepter. No jeweled crown rested upon her hair. Instead, she held a simple woven basket filled with fresh barley, fragrant herbs, and tiny wildflowers gathered during her morning walk. She had always believed that the simplest gifts often carried the deepest meaning. As she reached the edge of a broad wheat field, she paused. The harvest was still some time away. Each stalk stood proudly beneath the growing sun, its color slowly changing from soft green to warm gold. She reached out and allowed her fingertips to brush lightly across the tops of the grain. The movement created a quiet whisper that flowed through the field like a gentle secret. To most ears, it was only the sound of wheat dancing in the wind. To Demeter, it was the voice of the earth itself, patient, steady, always faithful. Nearby, a pair of young sparrows searched the ground for scattered seeds, while a family of quail disappeared quietly into the taller grasses. A gentle hare paused beside a patch of clover before continuing its peaceful morning journey. No creature hurried. Every living thing seemed to understand the calm rhythm of the countryside. Demeter smiled. She had long admired the quiet wisdom of growing things. Seeds never questioned whether spring would come. Trees never doubted that winter would one day pass. The earth trusted time. Perhaps, she often thought, people would find greater peace if they learned to do the same. Beyond the field stood a modest stone farmhouse surrounded by fig trees and climbing grapevines. Thin ribbons of smoke rose gently from its chimney. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the open windows, mixing with the aroma of rosemary and warm olive oil. Children laughed somewhere beyond the garden wall. A dog barked once before settling happily beneath the shade of an old cypress tree. These simple sounds filled Demeter with quiet contentment. The grand temples built in her honor were beautiful. But it was places like this that truly reflected her heart. Families sharing meals, neighbors helping one another during harvest, hands planting seeds with hope for seasons yet to come. The greatest blessings often arrived quietly. A good rain after weeks of dry weather, an orchard filled with fruit, a table where no one left hungry. Such moments rarely appeared in heroic poems, yet they sustained every kingdom. Demeter continued along the winding path until she reached a peaceful orchard where ancient olive trees stretched their silver-green branches toward the midday sky. Their trunks, broad and beautifully weathered, carried the memory of centuries. Some had watched entire civilizations rise and fall. Still, they continued offering shade, fruit, and quiet beauty to anyone who rested beneath them. She settled upon a smooth stone beneath the oldest tree. Nearby, a narrow stream wandered lazily through the orchard, its clear waters reflecting drifting clouds that moved slowly across the endless blue above. Dragonflies hovered above the reeds. Butterflies floated from blossom to blossom with effortless grace. A warm breeze stirred the branches overhead, filling the air with the soft rustling of countless leaves. For a long while, Demeter simply listened. Not every moment required action. Some moments were complete exactly as they were. She believed that stillness nourished the heart just as surely as rain nourished the fields. As the sun climbed toward its highest place in the sky, Farmers across Greece would soon pause beneath trees like these to rest from their work. Bread would be shared, water would be poured into simple clay cups. Stories would pass gently between friends who had worked the same land for many years. There was quiet wisdom in those ordinary conversations. The rhythm of the seasons had taught people patience long before books ever could. A gentle breeze carried another familiar fragrance across the orchard. It was unlike the scent of grain or fresh earth. There was salt upon it, a clean, cool freshness that spoke of distant waves and endless horizons. The olive leaves shimmered as though answering an old friend. Far beyond the rolling hills, sunlight danced upon the waters of the Aegean Sea. Demeter lifted her eyes toward the brilliant line where sea met sky. She smiled softly. She knew who was calling. Beyond the peaceful fields, beneath waters as old as the world itself, another kingdom was awakening with the afternoon tide. The great halls of Poseidon waited beneath the sea, where sunlight filtered through crystal blue water, and the quiet heartbeat of the ocean never truly ceased. The scent of the sea arrived long before the shoreline came into view. It drifted gently inland upon the afternoon breeze, carrying with it the clean fragrance of salt, sun-warmed stone, and distant waves that had traveled across the Aegean since long before the first cities of Greece had been imagined. Demeter watched the fields sway one final time before turning her gaze toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those rolling hills, beyond the olive groves and fishing villages, beyond the quiet beaches where children would soon chase the edge of the tide, lay another kingdom, not built upon earth, but beneath it. The sea stretched endlessly beneath the brilliant afternoon sky, its surface shimmering like polished glass wherever the sunlight touched it. From above, it appeared calm beyond measure. Yet beneath those gentle waves lived an entire world that few mortals could ever hope to witness. It was there that Poseidon spent many of his quiet hours. History remembered him as the mighty ruler of the seas, the shaker of the earth, the master of storms, the god whose temper could raise mountains of water powerful enough to swallow fleets. Those stories were remembered because storms were unforgettable, but storms were never the sea's true nature. Most days, the sea preferred peace, and so did its king. Far beneath the dancing surface, where shafts of sunlight filtered through clear blue water, stood the silent palace of Poseidon. Its towering halls had not been carved from marble like those upon Olympus. Instead, they had been shaped from living stone polished smooth by countless tides. Massive columns of pale coral rose toward vaulted ceilings, where delicate sea fans swayed gently with every passing current. Pearls, scattered naturally throughout the walls, glowed with a soft silver light that never faded. The palace seemed less like a building and more like a living part of the ocean itself. Schools of tiny silver fish drifted peacefully through open archways before disappearing into vast underwater gardens filled with waving seagrass and colorful coral. Sea turtles glided slowly across quiet courtyards. Bright orange starfish rested motionless upon ancient stone steps warmed by filtered sunlight. Nothing hurried here. Even time seemed to move more slowly beneath the sea. Poseidon walked along one of the broad coral terraces overlooking a deep underwater valley. His robe, rich with shades of deep blue and emerald green, moved gracefully with the currents surrounding him. The famous trident rested nearby against a smooth pillar of white stone. He carried it only when the sea truly needed his strength. Today, it remained untouched. Instead, he folded his hands behind his back and simply watched the endless movement of the ocean. Currents flowed like invisible rivers, Fish traveled in graceful harmony. Forests of kelp swayed gently beneath the afternoon light. The sea never stood still, yet it never appeared rushed. It had discovered something few kingdoms above the waves ever learned. Constant movement could still be peaceful. A curious dolphin appeared from the open water and circled slowly before approaching the terrace. Poseidon smiled. The dolphin had visited nearly every afternoon for many years. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The animal gently nudged the water's surface beside him before disappearing once again into the blue distance. Moments later, a pair of graceful sea turtles drifted overhead, moving with the quiet confidence of creatures who had never known the meaning of haste. Poseidon admired them greatly. The oldest beings of the sea had mastered patience. Every journey unfolded at its proper pace. There was wisdom beneath every wave. Far beyond the palace, sunlight shimmered through the upper waters like thousands of tiny stars scattered across the ceiling of the sea. The deeper one looked, the softer the light became. Blue slowly transformed into sapphire, then indigo, then a peaceful darkness where strange but gentle creatures glowed with quiet colors of their own. The ocean carried countless mysteries. Not all of them wished to be solved. Some were beautiful simply because they remained unknown. Poseidon often believed the sea taught the same lesson as sleep itself. One did not conquer it. One surrendered to it. Nearby, an octopus carefully explored the cracks between ancient stones while a graceful ray drifted silently across the sandy floor below. A cluster of seahorses clung gently to waving strands of seagrass as tiny bubbles floated upward toward the bright world above. Every creature possessed its own rhythm, its own place, its own quiet purpose. The ruler of the seas found comfort in that harmony. Many imagined his kingdom filled only with mighty sea serpents, roaring storms, and crashing waves. Those moments certainly existed, but they were rare visitors. Most afternoons resembled this one, peaceful, endless, filled with gentle movement rather than noise. Poseidon continued walking until he reached an open balcony formed naturally from smooth white stone. From there, he could see beyond the reefs toward the distant coastline of Greece. Fishing boats crossed the sparkling water, their white sails catching the afternoon breeze. To the fishermen aboard them, the sea appeared calm and generous. That pleased him. A quiet sea allowed families to return safely home before sunset. There were few greater gifts. He rested one hand upon the cool stone railing and closed his eyes. For a brief moment he listened, not to voices, but to the heartbeat of the ocean itself. The gentle rhythm of waves above, the distant songs of whales echoing through the deep, the soft clicking of dolphins, the whisper of currents flowing around ancient cliffs hidden beneath the water. Together they formed a melody older than Olympus itself. It was not loud. It did not seek attention. Like the sea, it asked only to be heard with patience. As the afternoon slowly stretched toward its golden hour, the sunlight filtering through the water grew warmer. Long ribbons of light danced across the palace floor before gradually beginning their slow journey westward. Poseidon knew the day was changing once again. Even beneath the sea, the passage of time could be felt. The warm glow reminded him that somewhere above the waves another goddess welcomed this hour more beautifully than anyone else. Where fragrant roses climbed marble walls, where doves rested beside sparkling fountains, where every breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, the hidden gardens of Aphrodite were beginning to glow beneath the golden light of late afternoon. And with them, another peaceful chapter upon Mount Olympus quietly unfolded. As the afternoon sun drifted gently toward the western sky, Its light softened into a warm, honey-colored glow. Across Greece, rooftops shimmered beneath the golden hour. The marble temples reflected the fading brilliance of the day. Olive trees cast long shadows across quiet hillsides, and the sea, which only moments before had sparkled with bright silver, now glowed with gentle shades of amber and rose. Even Mount Olympus seemed to breathe more slowly. This was the hour Aphrodite loved most, not because it was the most beautiful, but because beauty revealed itself differently now. The sharp brilliance of midday had faded. Everything had become softer, kinder, more forgiving. Hidden behind flowering terraces on the southern side of Olympus lay her private gardens. Many poets had written of Aphrodite rising from the sea, of her radiant appearance, and of the irresistible charm that surrounded her wherever she walked. Yet very few imagined where she spent the peaceful hours between those famous stories. It was here, far from grand ceremonies, far from admiration, far from the countless songs written in her honor. Her sanctuary was unlike any other place upon Olympus. There were no towering halls meant to inspire awe, no throne carved from precious stone. Instead, winding paths of pale marble disappeared beneath flowering vines that had climbed gracefully over elegant archways for centuries. Rose bushes bloomed in every imaginable shade: soft ivory, delicate blush, deep crimson, and warm coral. Jasmine climbed ancient columns, releasing its sweet fragrance into the afternoon air. Lavender swayed gently beside quiet fountains where crystal-clear water flowed with an almost musical rhythm. The breeze itself seemed scented with blossoms. It carried hints of orange flowers, fresh herbs, blooming myrtle, and the faint perfume of wild roses warmed beneath the gentle sun. Small white doves wandered freely between the garden paths. Some rested upon the edges of marble fountains. Others perched comfortably among flowering branches, occasionally lifting into the air before settling once more in another peaceful corner of the garden. Nothing disturbed them. They understood this place. Butterflies drifted lazily through the flowers. Golden bees moved patiently from blossom to blossom. Even the light appeared softer here, filtering gently through climbing vines before resting upon the white stone pathways below. Aphrodite walked slowly beneath one of the flower-covered archways. Her flowing robe shimmered with subtle shades of ivory and pale rose, catching the sunlight whenever the breeze stirred the delicate fabric. Her golden hair reflected the warm glow of the afternoon, though no jewel she wore seemed brighter than the quiet smile upon her face. Many believed beauty demanded attention. Aphrodite had learned something different. The truest beauty often appeared when no one was looking. She paused beside a quiet, reflecting pool. Its perfectly still surface mirrored the sky above, where slow-moving clouds floated peacefully toward the western horizon. Several white lilies rested upon the water. Tiny dragonflies skimmed effortlessly across the surface, creating circles that slowly disappeared into stillness once again. For a long while she simply watched. Not every beautiful thing needed to be possessed. Sometimes it was enough simply to notice it. A single rose petal drifted from a nearby branch and landed gently upon the pool. Its reflection became two petals, one floating upon the water, one floating beneath it. Aphrodite smiled softly. Beauty often revealed itself through small moments that lasted only seconds. That perhaps made them even more precious. She continued deeper into the gardens until she reached a quiet orchard where pomegranate trees stood beside ancient fig trees, their branches heavy with ripening fruit. Clusters of grapes hung from carefully tended vines that stretched between smooth marble pillars. The fragrance of ripe figs mixed with warm earth and blooming rosemary carried pleasantly through the still air. Nearby, an elderly gardener carefully trimmed a climbing vine that had grown beyond its graceful arch. He worked slowly, patiently. His hands moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that gardens were never truly finished. Aphrodite greeted him with a gentle nod. He returned the smile before continuing his work. No grand conversation was needed. Some friendships were built through shared silence. Many stories celebrated love as though it arrived in a single unforgettable moment. A glance across a crowded room, a heroic promise, a dramatic reunion. Yet Aphrodite knew another truth. Love most often lived inside ordinary days, in tending a garden together, in sharing fresh bread beneath an olive tree, in waiting patiently for someone to return home before sunset, in remembering another person's favorite flower. These quiet acts rarely inspired poets, yet they endured long after songs had faded. She reached a shaded terrace overlooking the valleys below. From here she could see vineyards stretching across distant hills, orchards glowing beneath the afternoon light, and tiny villages preparing for the peaceful hours of evening. Children chased one another along dusty paths. Neighbors gathered beneath grape arbors. Fresh laundry fluttered gently in the breeze. Smoke curled upward from kitchen hearths where evening meals were beginning to simmer. The beauty of the world had never belonged only to gods. It lived just as fully among ordinary people. Aphrodite rested her hands upon the warm marble railing. A pair of doves landed nearby. One carefully preened the feathers of the other before both settled comfortably side by side. She watched them with quiet affection. No words, no promises, only gentle companionship. Sometimes that was the purest expression of love. The afternoon slowly surrendered to evening. The sunlight deepened into richer shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the gardens. The fountains continued their endless song, while the first evening breeze carried a faint coolness down from the snowy peaks of Olympus. Then another sound reached the garden, soft, rhythmic, almost impossible to hear at first. A distant melody, not the graceful music of Apollo, nor the whisper of flowing water. It was the quiet laughter of voices gathering somewhere beyond the flowering terraces. The scent of fresh grapes, wild herbs, and newly baked bread drifted gently through the air. Aphrodite lifted her eyes toward the western hills and smiled knowingly. The day was slowly giving way to evening, and somewhere among shaded vineyards and stone courtyards, where neighbors would soon gather beneath lantern light to share stories, music, and simple meals, Dionysus was preparing to welcome the most peaceful celebration of the day, not one of noise or excess, but of friendship, gratitude, and the quiet joy of being together as the sun slipped gently below the horizon. The last rays of the afternoon sun slipped quietly behind the western mountains, painting the sky with gentle shades of amber, rose, and soft violet. Across Greece, the busy rhythm of the day began to slow. Farmers laid aside their tools. Fishing boats returned to familiar harbors. The scent of warm bread drifted from village ovens, while the laughter of children slowly gave way to quieter conversations shared beneath olive trees and grapevines. The world was preparing for evening, and no one understood this peaceful transition better than Dionysus. Many ancient stories remembered him as the god of wine, celebration, and joyful festivals. Poets often described crowded gatherings filled with music, dancing, and overflowing cups. Those tales became famous because they were colorful and unforgettable. Yet they revealed only one side of Dionysus. There was another side, a quieter side, one that appeared every evening when the noise of the day gently faded and people gathered not to escape life, but to appreciate it. Far below Olympus, hidden among rolling vineyards that covered the gentle hillsides, stood a peaceful estate unlike any royal palace. Its stone buildings were simple, its wooden tables were well worn, its gardens overflowed with grapevines, rosemary, thyme, and fragrant lavender. Nothing here was extravagant, everything felt welcoming. The wide courtyard at its center was shaded by an enormous ancient plane tree, whose broad branches had offered comfort to travelers for generations beyond memory. As the first lanterns were lit beneath its leaves, their warm glow mixed beautifully with the fading colors of sunset. Dionysus walked slowly through the vineyard. His robe, woven in deep shades of burgundy and soft forest green, brushed gently against rows of ripening vines heavy with dark purple grapes. An ivy wreath rested lightly upon his curls. There were no jeweled crowns, no elaborate throne, only the quiet contentment of another beautiful evening drawing near. He paused beside a single vine, lifting one cluster of grapes into the warm golden light. The fruit was nearly ready, not perfect yet, but almost. He smiled. Nature had never hurried its finest work. Neither should people. Nearby, several elderly gardeners carefully inspected the vines, speaking in calm voices as they discussed the coming harvest. A young apprentice listened closely, learning not from books, but from years of quiet experience passed patiently from one generation to the next. Dionysus watched them with quiet satisfaction. Knowledge shared freely was another kind of celebration. Beyond the vineyard stretched orchards filled with figs, pears, and pomegranates. Small stone paths wandered between them, eventually reaching a peaceful courtyard where a long wooden table had already been prepared for the evening meal. Fresh bread rested inside woven baskets. Bowls of olives reflected the lantern light. Soft white cheese, fragrant herbs, roasted vegetables, ripe figs, and honey waited upon smooth clay dishes. Everything was simple. Everything was enough. There was no feast meant to impress kings, only a meal prepared to be shared. One by one, guests quietly arrived. An old shepherd carrying a weathered walking staff, a potter whose hands still bore traces of fresh clay, a traveling musician with a well-loved wooden flute, two sisters bringing warm loaves wrapped in linen cloth. No one asked who was wealthy. No one asked who was important. At this table, every chair held equal value. Dionysus greeted each guest with the same gentle warmth, not because they had accomplished great things, but because they had come. Sometimes, he believed, showing up for one another was life's greatest kindness. As twilight deepened, the first stars appeared above the vineyard. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine, ripening fruit, and warm earth cooling beneath the fading sunlight. Lanterns flickered softly among the branches overhead, their golden light dancing across smiling faces gathered around the table. The meal began without ceremony. Fresh bread was broken and shared. Clay cups were filled. Stories drifted from one end of the table to the other. Not heroic stories, not tales of monsters or mighty kings, simply memories. The first grape harvest a grandfather could still remember. The funniest mistake made by a young baker. A child proudly describing the owl that had visited her family's olive tree. Laughter came naturally, never loudly, never carelessly. It rose gently before settling once more into comfortable silence. Dionysus listened far more than he spoke. that surprised many who imagined him forever at the center of celebration. Yet he had learned something valuable long ago. The happiest gatherings were never built around one voice. They were built around many. Each story made the evening richer. Each memory strengthened invisible threads connecting neighbor to neighbor. As darkness slowly settled across the countryside, musicians quietly lifted simple instruments: a wooden flute, a small hand drum, a softly played lyre. The melodies that followed were gentle enough that even the crickets continued singing without interruption. No one performed, everyone participated. Some hummed quietly, others tapped gentle rhythms upon the table. Children leaned comfortably against their parents while older guests watched the stars emerge one by one above the hills. For a while, nothing else mattered. Not tomorrow's work, not distant worries, only this peaceful evening shared beneath an ancient tree. Dionysus looked toward the night sky. The last glow of sunset had disappeared completely. A silver moon now climbed above the eastern horizon, bathing the vineyards in cool, gentle light. Its quiet beauty reminded him that another guardian now watched over the world, not one of music, not one of harvest, but one whose gift was even quieter. Far away, upon the highest slopes of Olympus, a single warm light still burned steadily inside a peaceful home. Unlike every other flame in Greece, it had never gone out. It had welcomed every sunrise. It had witnessed every sunset. And tonight, as it had for ages beyond memory, it continued to glow with quiet constancy. The eternal hearth of Hestia was waiting, and with it came the calmest hour of the entire day. Night arrived upon Mount Olympus with remarkable gentleness. There was no sudden darkness, no sharp dividing line between day and evening. Instead, the last colors of sunset slowly dissolved into deep shades of sapphire and violet, while the first stars quietly awakened above the mountain. A cool breeze wandered through marble courtyards where the warmth of the afternoon still lingered upon the stone. The fountains continued their endless songs. Olive leaves whispered softly beneath the moonlight. The world seemed to exhale. This was Hestia's favorite hour. Unlike many of the Olympian gods, Hestia was rarely the subject of heroic poems. No mighty quests were undertaken in her name. No monsters challenged her. No triumphant victories echoed across distant kingdoms. And yet, every home in Greece knew her presence. Every hearth that glowed on a winter evening. Every family that gathered around a shared meal. Every traveler welcomed with warmth after a long journey. Each quiet act of hospitality carried a small reflection of Hestia's gift. She never sought greatness. She simply made ordinary moments feel like home. Her dwelling stood near the very heart of Olympus, not because she desired importance, but because every road upon the mountain eventually led there. Unlike the grand palaces of Zeus or the flowering gardens of Aphrodite, Hestia's home possessed a simple beauty. Its white marble walls were softened by climbing ivy. Small terracotta pots overflowed with rosemary, lavender, sage, and fragrant thyme. Gentle lanterns hung beneath wooden beams, casting warm circles of golden light upon the stone pathways outside. Nothing glittered. Nothing demanded admiration. Everything invited peace. Inside, the great hearth burned with an eternal flame. Its fire was unlike any other. It never roared. It never blazed wildly. Its light rose in calm, golden waves, filling every corner of the room with quiet warmth. The fire gave no smoke, only comfort. Hestia sat beside the hearth upon a smooth wooden chair polished by centuries of gentle use. A length of soft wool rested in her hands as she slowly worked careful stitches into a simple woven blanket. There was no urgency in her movements. Each stitch followed another with patient rhythm. Outside, the stars slowly multiplied across the heavens. Inside, the crackling fire kept steady company. Many imagined that immortality meant endless excitement. Hestia knew something different. True happiness often lived inside repetition. Lighting the same fire, preparing the same table, welcoming familiar faces home at the end of another day. These ordinary rituals quietly shaped extraordinary lives. A kettle of fragrant mountain herbs rested above the glowing embers. Steam rose gently into the room, carrying the soothing scent of chamomile, mint, and wild honey. Nearby, fresh bread cooled upon a linen cloth while small bowls of olives, figs, and soft goat cheese waited upon a sturdy oak table. Nothing had been prepared for a feast. Everything had been prepared for whoever might arrive. That was Hestia's way. A home should always be ready to welcome another soul, without warning, without expectation, only kindness. A gentle knock sounded upon the open doorway. Hestia looked up and smiled. Standing outside was Hermes. His long day's journey had finally come to an end. Dust from countless mountain roads still rested lightly upon his sandals, while his leather satchel hung comfortably from one shoulder. "Good evening," he said softly. "Welcome home," Hestia replied. She asked no questions. She needed no explanation. She simply poured warm herbal tea into a clay cup and placed fresh bread upon the table. Hermes accepted both with quiet gratitude. For several peaceful moments, neither spoke. The silence felt complete. Sometimes the greatest kindness was allowing another person to rest without asking them to explain their weariness. Soon another visitor arrived. Apollo entered carrying his golden lyre beneath one arm. The melodies of the morning had long since faded, but the peaceful expression upon his face remained. He placed the instrument carefully beside the wall before taking a seat near the fire. Not long afterward came Demeter, bringing a woven basket filled with ripe figs gathered from her evening orchards. Aphrodite followed with fragrant jasmine blossoms freshly cut from her garden. Even Artemis appeared briefly, her cloak still carrying the fresh scent of pine forests and cool mountain air. No ceremony announced their arrival. No servants called their names. They simply came, as families had always done, one by one. The firelight danced gently across familiar faces. Warm bread was broken into smaller pieces and passed around the table. Fresh figs were shared. Herbal tea replaced the excitement of the day with quiet comfort. Conversation came naturally, not about kingdoms, not about prophecies, not about legendary heroes. Instead, Apollo spoke of the swallows nesting beneath his pavilion. Demeter described the first signs of ripening wheat. Artemis smiled while telling the others about a curious young fawn that had followed her through the forest. Hermes mentioned an old shepherd who had carefully rescued a frightened lamb from a rocky hillside. Each story was wonderfully ordinary, yet no one grew bored. The gods understood something many mortals often forgot. Small moments, remembered together, gradually became life's greatest treasures. The eternal fire crackled softly. Outside, the moon climbed higher above Olympus. Its silver light flowed through the open doorway, meeting the warm golden glow of the hearth exactly at the threshold. Two kinds of light, one from the heavens, one from home, neither brighter than the other. For a long while, no one spoke. The silence itself had become part of the evening. Comfortable, unhurried, complete. Hestia looked around the room. This, she thought quietly, was the true strength of Olympus. Not thunder, not power, not immortality, but belonging. A place where every journey eventually ended, where every weary traveler found warmth, where every day, no matter how extraordinary, concluded beside a welcoming fire. As the last cups of tea were gently set aside, the mountain grew quieter still. Far beyond the warm windows of Hestia's home, another realm waited beneath the stars, a kingdom often misunderstood, a place remembered by mortals with fear, though fear was rarely its truest nature. Beyond the distant rivers, beyond the quiet cypress groves, where ancient souls rested beneath peaceful skies, Hades had begun his nightly walk through the silent kingdom that few living eyes had ever seen. And so, beneath the calm light of the rising moon, the story gently continued toward the quietest destination of all. The moon had climbed high above Mount Olympus. Its silver light rested gently upon the marble rooftops, the silent gardens, and the ancient pathways where the gods had walked throughout the day. Above the clouds, Olympus had finally become quiet, but far below the world of sunlight, another kingdom was awake. It was a place most mortals imagined only with fear, a place of shadows, of silence, of ancient gates and endless darkness, the realm of Hades. Yet, like so many stories told about the gods, the truth was softer than the legend. The underworld was not a place of constant suffering. It was a place of stillness, a place where journeys finally came to rest. Far beneath the mountains and rivers of the living world, beyond paths that no mortal traveler could easily find, stretched a vast kingdom illuminated by a strange, peaceful twilight. There was no sun here, and yet there was light. Soft silver-blue radiance seemed to rise from the ancient stones themselves, illuminating quiet pathways that disappeared toward distant hills. Tall cypress trees stood beside those paths, their dark branches moving gently in a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. Silent rivers crossed the landscape. Their waters moved slowly beneath bridges of black stone. Beyond them stood the great gates of Hades. They were enormous, ancient, and beautifully carved, but they were not frightening. Time had softened their edges. Wild vines climbed across the stone. Small white flowers grew between the cracks. Even here, life had found a way to appear. Hades walked alone along the riverbank. His robes were dark, but not black. They carried subtle shades of midnight blue and charcoal gray that seemed to change beneath the strange light of the underworld. A simple crown rested upon his head. The famous helm of darkness was nowhere to be seen. He did not need it tonight. The underworld was peaceful. Cerberus, the great three-headed guardian, rested nearby beneath an ancient cypress tree. Despite the stories mortals told about him, the enormous hound was not always fierce. Tonight, two of his heads were sleeping. The third watched the river lazily, its ears occasionally lifting at distant sounds. Hades stopped beside him. One enormous head slowly rose. Hades reached down and gently touched the creature's fur. Cerberus closed his eyes again. The great guardian had nothing to fear from his master. There was comfort even here. The king of the underworld continued along the quiet path. The souls who lived within his kingdom were not endlessly wandering. Many had found their places. Some rested in peaceful fields. Some remained among familiar memories. Some simply waited in quiet contemplation. The underworld was not one place, it was many. Different souls carried different journeys, different memories, different kinds of peace. Hades understood this better than anyone. His responsibility was not to frighten the dead. It was to keep the boundaries of existence in balance. The living belonged to the world above. The dead belong to the world below. Neither should be disturbed unnecessarily. That balance had existed long before mortals began writing stories about the gods, and Hades guarded it carefully. He reached a quiet meadow where pale flowers grew beneath the cypress trees. The flowers had no name among the living. Their petals glowed faintly beneath the underworld's gentle light. A soft breeze moved through them. The sight was strangely beautiful. Hades sat upon a weathered stone bench. For a while, he simply watched the flowers move. There was something peaceful about a place where nothing needed to hurry. Above ground, mortals measured life by seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter. They watched children grow. They watched fields change. They watched generations arrive and disappear. Down here, time felt different. It did not race toward anything. It simply existed. Perhaps that was why Hades had always been quieter than his brothers. Zeus ruled the heavens. Poseidon ruled the seas. Hades ruled what came after. His kingdom taught him patience. He had learned that every life eventually reached a quiet ending. And because of that, every moment before the ending mattered. A faint sound came from the distant river. Hades turned his head. A small boat was approaching. Its oars moved slowly through the dark water. Charon, the ancient ferryman, guided it toward the opposite bank. He had made the journey countless times, yet he never appeared hurried. When the boat reached the shore, the passenger stepped quietly onto the stone path. Hades watched from a distance. There was no spectacle, no judgment spoken aloud, only the continuation of an ancient order. He allowed the moment to pass peacefully before returning his attention to the meadow. Nearby, a small cluster of white flowers moved gently in the breeze. Hades reached toward one. He did not pick it. He simply brushed his fingers lightly against its petals. Even in his kingdom, beauty existed. Perhaps that was the greatest secret of the underworld. Darkness and beauty were not opposites. Sometimes they existed together. As the night deepened, Hades eventually rose and continued toward his palace. Unlike the bright marble halls of Olympus, his palace was carved from dark stone streaked with silver. Yet inside, it was surprisingly warm. Bronze lamps burned along the walls. Soft carpets covered the floors. Quiet fountains flowed through interior courtyards. Ancient trees grew beneath open ceilings, where the strange blue light of the underworld sky could be seen. And waiting within one peaceful chamber was Persephone. She sat beside a small table covered with pomegranate blossoms. Her presence changed the atmosphere of the entire room. Where Hades brought stillness, Persephone brought the memory of spring. She had spent part of her life beneath the earth and part above it. Because of that, she understood both worlds. She knew the quiet beauty of winter, and she knew the joyful promise of spring. Hades entered the room. Persephone looked up and smiled. "You've been walking again," she said gently. Hades nodded. The kingdom was quiet tonight. It usually is. A faint smile appeared upon his face. They sat together beside the small table. No great conversation was necessary. They simply shared the peaceful end of another day. Persephone opened a bowl of pomegranate seeds. Their deep red color seemed almost impossibly bright against the dark stone. She offered some to Hades. He accepted one. For a moment, the king of the underworld looked almost like any other husband sharing a quiet evening at home. Outside, the cypress trees moved gently in the unseen breeze. Inside, the lamps burned steadily. The kingdom rested, and far above them, the moon continued its silent journey across the heavens. Hades looked toward the distant ceiling. He could not see Olympus from here, but he knew it was there. He knew Zeus was watching the stars. He knew Athena was probably still surrounded by books. He knew Hermes had finally found his way home. He knew Hestia's fire continued to burn. Every kingdom had its purpose, every god had a role, and every world depended upon the others. The heavens needed the sea needed the earth needed the seasons, the living needed the dead, and the dead, in their own quiet way, remained part of the memory of the living. Hades understood that better than anyone. He closed his eyes. For a few moments, the entire underworld seemed to become completely still. No footsteps, no voices, no distant bells, only the faint movement of the rivers, only the whisper of the cypress trees, only the quiet breathing of an ancient kingdom beneath the world. Then, far above, somewhere beyond the mountains, a tiny flame continued burning, the same flame Hestia had tended throughout the evening. Its warmth had begun to spread beyond the hearth, and as the deepest hours of night approached, even the gods of Olympus would soon surrender to sleep. But not all of them. Somewhere upon a high balcony beneath the stars, Zeus remained awake. The king of the gods was watching something unusual moving across the heavens. A single dark cloud, slowly, silently, and within that cloud, a faint spark of lightning had begun to glow. The dark cloud moved slowly across the heavens. It was not a storm, not yet. There was no thunder, no violent wind, only a quiet darkness passing between the stars. From the highest balcony of Olympus, Zeus watched it approach. The rest of the mountain had fallen asleep. The gardens were still. The fountains whispered beneath the moonlight. The marble corridors stood empty. Even the eternal hearth of Hestia burned more quietly now, its golden flame rising and falling with a peaceful rhythm. But Zeus remained awake. He had always known that the night carried things the daylight could not reveal. During the day, the world was filled with movement. Travelers walked the roads. Ships crossed the sea. Farmers worked beneath the sun. Gods gathered in their halls. Mortals prayed. Children played. Birds sang. The world announced itself constantly. Night was different. Night allowed hidden things to become visible. Zeus stepped closer to the edge of the balcony. The dark cloud had now reached the moon. For a moment, the silver light disappeared behind it. Olympus became darker. Then the cloud passed. The moon returned. Nothing had changed, and yet Zeus remained thoughtful. He raised one hand toward the sky. A tiny spark of electricity danced between his fingers. It was barely visible, a thread of pale light. He watched it carefully. Lightning was often imagined as an instrument of destruction, but Zeus knew that lightning was also one of nature's most beautiful forms of energy. It illuminated the darkness for only an instant, then disappeared. Perhaps that was why mortals feared it. They saw only its power. They did not see its brief beauty. Zeus closed his hand. The spark vanished. Behind him came a soft sound. Footsteps. He turned. Athena stood beneath the marble archway. She carried no scrolls tonight. Only a simple gray cloak wrapped around her shoulders. "You're still awake," she said. "So are you." Athena smiled. "Some questions are difficult to leave unanswered." Zeus looked toward the sky. "And what question keeps you awake tonight?" Athena stepped beside him. "Why is the cloud moving against the wind?" Zeus glanced at her. For a moment neither spoke. Then he smiled. "That is exactly what I was wondering." They watched together. The cloud continued moving slowly across the stars. Athena studied its shape. "It isn't a storm." "No." "Then what is it?" Zeus shook his head. "I don't know." That answer might have surprised a mortal. The king of the gods did not know. Yet Athena seemed pleased, because uncertainty was not failure. It was an invitation to discover something new. They remained on the balcony. The night stretched peacefully around them. Far below, the valleys of Greece were completely dark except for tiny points of fire glowing from homes and villages. One by one, those lights disappeared as families settled into sleep. A fisherman closed his shutters. A shepherd wrapped himself in a wool blanket. A mother gently covered her sleeping child. A traveler finally reached an inn and placed his sandals beside the door. Thousands of ordinary lives were entering the same peaceful night. Zeus watched them all. From this height, every human worry appeared small. But he knew that to the people experiencing them, those worries were enormous. A farmer might wonder whether tomorrow would bring rain. A sailor might wonder whether the sea would remain calm. A parent might worry about a sick child. A young person might wonder what the future held. The gods could not remove every uncertainty from human life. Perhaps they were never meant to. Sometimes their greatest gift was simply allowing the world to continue, to let morning arrive, to let seeds grow, to let ships find their harbors, to let people discover answers for themselves. Athena looked toward the sleeping world. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what mortals think we do when they cannot see us?" Zeus smiled. "Probably something far more dramatic than the truth." Athena laughed softly. "Perhaps." The two gods remained beneath the stars. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then Zeus noticed something. The cloud had disappeared. Not moved away. Disappeared. The sky was perfectly clear. Thousands of stars shone above them. Athena looked carefully at the heavens. "Did you see where it went?" "No." For the first time that night, Zeus looked genuinely puzzled. He raised his hand again. A tiny spark of lightning appeared. This time, however, the spark did not fade. It stretched gently between his fingers before drifting upward like a thread of silver smoke. Athena watched with fascination. "It is following something." Zeus nodded. The tiny light moved toward the north. The two gods followed. Not physically. They simply watched as the strange spark traveled through the night sky. It passed above the mountains, above the sea, above sleeping forests. Finally, it stopped over a distant valley. There, for one brief moment, a tiny golden light appeared. Then another, then another. The lights formed a delicate pattern among the stars. Athena's eyes widened. "That isn't lightning." "No." Zeus looked toward the distant constellation. "It is a message. But from whom?" The answer did not come immediately. Instead, the golden light slowly faded. The sky became ordinary once more. Athena remained thoughtful. "Perhaps the gods are not the only ones watching." Zeus looked at her. "What do you mean?" Athena smiled. "I don't know." Then she turned toward the quiet halls of Olympus. "For once, perhaps we should allow a mystery to remain a mystery." Zeus laughed softly. "That sounds unlike you." "It is precisely because I am Athena that I know when not to force an answer." They walked back toward the palace together. Behind them, the night sky remained perfectly still. But something had changed. The gods had spent the entire day living their hidden lives. They had walked through forests, crossed roads, watched the sea, tended gardens, shared meals, guarded the dead, and now, in the deepest hours of night, they had discovered something none of them had expected. The heavens were watching them too. As Zeus entered the quiet palace, he looked once more toward the stars. Then he closed the great marble doors. The night continued, and gradually, one by one, the gods of Olympus surrendered to sleep. Apollo rested beside his silent lyre. Athena closed her library. Artemis disappeared into the peaceful forests. Hermes finally removed his travel-worn sandals. Demeter rested beside her quiet fields. Poseidon drifted through the deep blue silence of the sea. Aphrodite slept among her roses. Dionysus rested beneath the ancient plane tree. Hestia remained beside her eternal flame. And far below them all, Hades continued his quiet watch. The world was finally still, but beneath the silence, something ancient was beginning to stir. Not a monster, not a war, not a storm, something much older. A forgotten memory, a memory that belonged not to one god, but to all of them. And when morning came, the first god to remember it would be Athena. Morning came to Olympus without announcing itself. There was no thunder, no trumpet, no divine procession crossing the heavens. Only the first pale light of dawn slipping quietly across the mountain. The stars disappeared one by one. The moon faded into the brightening sky. A cool breeze moved through the sleeping gardens, carrying the scent of wet stone, olive leaves, and flowers that had opened during the night. For a few precious moments, Olympus remained completely still. Then Athena opened her eyes. She sat upright in her quiet chamber. Something was wrong. She did not know what. She simply knew. A strange feeling rested at the edge of her thoughts, like a word she could almost remember. She had experienced the sensation before, sometimes while reading an ancient scroll, sometimes while waking from a dream. A forgotten idea would appear for a moment, almost within reach, and then disappear. But this was different. This memory felt older, much older. Athena stepped from her bed and walked toward the open balcony. The morning sky was pale gold. Birds were beginning to sing. The world below was waking. Everything appeared normal, yet the feeling remained. She closed her eyes. For a moment she saw something. A mountain, not Olympus. Another mountain, higher, older, surrounded by clouds that glowed with golden light. She saw figures standing upon its summit. Not the Olympians, older beings. Ancient shapes made of light and shadow. Then the vision disappeared. Athena opened her eyes. Her heart was beating faster. She knew the stories of the old gods. She knew about the Titans. She knew about Cronus. She knew about the great struggle that had come before the Olympian age. But this memory was not part of any story she had ever read. It felt personal, as though she had witnessed it herself. A quiet knock sounded behind her. Athena turned. Zeus stood in the doorway. He looked unusually serious. "You remembered too," Athena said. Zeus said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded. "I saw the mountain." Athena's expression changed. "You remember it?" "I think I do." The two gods walked together toward the central courtyard. The palace was beginning to wake. Servants carried fresh flowers through the corridors. Fountains were being opened. The smell of warm bread drifted from the kitchens. Yet neither paid much attention to the familiar morning rituals. Something far older had occupied their thoughts. As they entered the courtyard, Hera was already there. She looked toward them. "You both have that expression." Athena raised an eyebrow. "What expression?" "The expression gods wear when they have discovered something they don't understand." Zeus smiled faintly. "Then you already know." Hera's expression softened. "I dreamed about the mountain." Silence followed. Three gods, one memory, one forgotten place. Soon Apollo arrived, then Artemis, then Hermes. One by one, the gods gathered beneath the ancient olive trees. Each had experienced something during the night. Each had seen the same impossible mountain. Even Poseidon had felt something strange beneath the ocean. Demeter had awakened with the scent of an unfamiliar flower in her memory. Aphrodite remembered a voice calling her name from somewhere beyond the stars. Dionysus remembered laughter. Hestia remembered a fire that burned brighter than the sun. And Hades, Hades remembered silence, a silence so complete that even the underworld seemed to disappear. The gods looked at one another. For once, none knew what to say. Athena finally spoke. "These memories belong to all of us." Zeus nodded. "But they happened before we were gods." Poseidon crossed his arms. "Before Olympus?" "Perhaps." Hermes glanced toward the sky. "Then where did we come from?" No one answered. That was the question, the one question that had remained hidden beneath every myth. Where had the Olympians truly begun? Mortals had written countless stories about their births. Zeus had been hidden from Cronus. Athena had emerged from Zeus. Aphrodite had risen from the sea. Apollo and Artemis had been born to Leto. Hermes had been born in a cave. The stories were familiar, but myths were often memories reshaped by time. What if there had been something before the stories, something none of them remembered clearly? Athena walked toward the center of the courtyard. There, beneath the oldest olive tree, stood a circular stone. She had seen it thousands of times. Yet that morning, something about it seemed different. A faint symbol had appeared upon its surface, a circle surrounded by 7 small stars. Athena knelt. She touched the symbol. The stone became warm. Everyone stepped closer. A soft golden light emerged from beneath the surface. It spread outward in delicate lines, forming an ancient map across the courtyard floor. Mountains appeared, rivers, oceans. But the map was not Greece. It showed the world as it had been before the Olympians ruled, before cities, before temples, before mortals had learned to write. At the center stood the mysterious mountain from Athena's dream. Zeus stared at it. "I know that place." "How?" Hera asked. He looked at her. "I don't remember." The golden map shifted. The mountain disappeared. In its place appeared a vast field beneath a sky filled with stars. 7 figures stood together. They were young, not children, but not yet the gods the world would eventually know. They stood beside a great fire, and around them stood ancient beings whose faces could not be seen. Athena leaned closer. Then the image changed. A great darkness moved across the sky. The 7 figures turned toward it. The golden image vanished. The courtyard became silent again. No one spoke. Then Hestia whispered, "The fire." Everyone looked at her. She touched her heart. "I remember." Her voice was soft. "Before Olympus." She paused. There was another home. Zeus looked toward her. "Where?" Hestia shook her head. "I don't know." But she did remember one thing. A fire. A very old fire. A fire that had burned before the first temples, before the first cities, before the first prayers. And somehow, that fire was still burning, somewhere, waiting for them. The gods stood beneath the ancient olive tree while morning sunlight slowly spread across the courtyard. For the first time in ages, Olympus felt different, not dangerous, not threatened, simply incomplete. Their hidden daily lives had shown them who they were now, but somewhere beyond memory waited the answer to who they had once been. Athena looked toward the distant mountains. "We need to find it." Zeus nodded. "Then we will." But none of them noticed the tiny golden spark that had appeared upon the ancient stone. It was the same light they had seen among the stars the night before. It flickered once, then twice, and beneath the courtyard floor, something answered. A distant sound, almost too quiet to hear. The sound of a heartbeat, slow, ancient, patient, waiting. And somewhere far beyond Olympus, beneath mountains no mortal had ever climbed, the forgotten fire began to glow. For several moments, no one moved. The ancient olive tree stood quietly above them, its silver-green leaves trembling in the morning breeze. Beneath their feet, The golden symbol on the stone had disappeared, yet the warmth remained. Athena could still feel it beneath her fingertips, a slow pulse, almost like a heartbeat. She looked toward Zeus. "Did you feel that?" Zeus nodded. "So did I." Poseidon stepped closer to the stone. He placed one hand against its surface. The expression on his face changed almost immediately. "I hear water." Hermes frowned. "Water?" Poseidon closed his eyes. "Not the sea." He listened carefully. "A river." Demeter approached next. The moment her fingers touched the stone, she inhaled softly. "I smell earth." Artemis looked toward her. "What kind?" Demeter opened her eyes. "Old earth." Her voice became quieter. "Earth that has never known a plow." The gods exchanged glances. One by one they began to understand. The stone was not showing them random memories. It was awakening something that belonged to each of them, something they had forgotten. Athena placed both hands upon the ancient stone. The courtyard disappeared. For a single breath, Olympus was gone. She stood somewhere else. There was no marble, no palace, no gardens, no temples, only an enormous valley beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. The air was warm. The ground was covered in soft golden grass. At the center of the valley burned a fire. It was not an ordinary fire. Its flames were perfectly still. They rose toward the heavens without smoke. Their color changed continuously, from gold to silver, from silver to deep blue, then back to gold. 7 young figures stood around it. Athena recognized them immediately. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Hades, and herself. But something was different. They were not gods. Not yet. They wore simple clothing. No crowns, no weapons, no symbols of power. They looked almost like travelers who had wandered into a strange land and discovered one another beside an ancient fire. Athena stared. She heard a voice, not one of the 7. An older voice, gentle, neither male nor female. "You will forget this place." Athena turned. Nothing stood behind her. The voice continued. "You must forget." "Why?" The answer came slowly. "Because memory is a kind of power." The fire flickered. "Those who remember the beginning may also remember what existed before it." Athena looked toward the others. Zeus seemed frightened. Hera held his hand. Poseidon stared into the fire. Demeter looked toward the valley. Hestia stood closest to the flames. Hades remained slightly apart from the others. Then Athena saw something beyond them, a vast shadow moving between the distant mountains. It was enormous, too enormous to understand. It did not walk. It seemed to move like darkness itself. The 7 figures turned toward it. The ancient voice spoke again. "When the darkness returns, you will need the fire." Athena woke. She was back beneath the olive tree. Zeus was holding her shoulder. "Athena." She looked around. The other gods were watching her. "What did you see?" She hesitated. Then she told them. The valley, the fire, the 7 figures, the shadow, and the warning. When she finished, nobody spoke. Finally, Hestia stepped forward. "The fire." Athena looked at her. "You remember it?" Hestia nodded. "Not everything." She closed her eyes. "But I remember holding it." "What do you mean?" Hestia looked toward the eastern horizon. "I think I was the one who carried the flame." The words settled heavily over the courtyard. Zeus approached her. "Where did you carry it?" "I don't know." "Who gave it to you?" "I don't know." "Then what do you remember?" Hestia looked at the ancient stone. "Someone told me that as long as the fire remained alive, the world would have a home." Silence. The sentence sounded strangely familiar, not because any of them had heard it before, but because it felt like something they had always known. Hera slowly sat upon the edge of the fountain. If that fire still exists, then we have to find it, Hermes said. Zeus looked at him. Hermes shrugged. What? You all know I'm going to say it. A faint smile appeared on Athena's face. Even now, Hermes could make the impossible sound almost ordinary, but the question remained. Where was the fire? The golden map had shown only a mountain, nothing else. Athena returned to the stone. This time, she did not touch it immediately. She studied the symbol carefully. 7 stars, a circle, and beneath them, a tiny mark resembling a flame. She recognized the pattern. It was not Greek. It was older, much older. Athena turned toward the library. I've seen this symbol before. Zeus raised an eyebrow. Where? In the oldest scrolls. Hermes smiled. Then perhaps our morning walk is about to become a library visit. They crossed the courtyard together. The gods followed. As they entered Athena's great library, the morning light poured through the tall windows. Thousands of scrolls rested upon their shelves. Records of wars, poems, maps, genealogies, astronomical observations, stories of forgotten kingdoms. Athena walked directly toward the oldest section. She had never allowed many others to enter this part of the library. The scrolls here were fragile. Some were older than Olympus itself. She climbed a narrow wooden ladder and reached the highest shelf. Her fingers moved across several ancient containers, then stopped. She pulled down a small scroll wrapped in faded linen. Dust floated through the sunlight as she placed it upon the table. This is the oldest document in my collection. Zeus looked at the seal. It was the same symbol. 7 stars, a circle, the flame. Athena carefully unwrapped it. The parchment was almost black with age. The writing was unlike any alphabet used by Greek scribes. Yet somehow Athena understood it. She read silently. Then her expression changed. What does it say? Hera asked. Athena looked up. It speaks of a place called the First Hearth. Hestia stepped closer. The First Hearth. Athena nodded. It says the gods once gathered there before they had names. Poseidon frowned. Before we had names? Yes. Athena continued reading. The First Hearth was hidden beyond the western mountains, beneath a sky where the stars never moved. Hermes looked toward the windows. That sounds impossible. It gets stranger. Athena turned another section of the parchment. The hearth was protected by 7 paths, one for each of us, Demeter said. Athena nodded. But there is a final passage. Everyone waited. She read it slowly. The 7 may return only when they remember that they were never 7. The room became completely silent. Apollo looked puzzled. What does that mean? Athena did not answer immediately. She read the final line. Then she looked toward Hestia. It says the fire belongs to all of us. Hestia understood. The hearth was not merely a place. It was a symbol. The 7 gods were never truly separate. Their powers had always been connected. Sky, marriage, sea, earth, hearth, underworld, wisdom. 7 parts of one ancient order. And perhaps that was why the memory had been hidden. Perhaps the gods had forgotten because they needed to discover themselves again. Athena carefully rolled the parchment closed. We need to find the first hearth. Zeus nodded. But we cannot all leave Olympus. Athena smiled. We don't have to. She walked toward the enormous map room at the far end of the library. A great map of the ancient world covered an entire wall. Mountains, seas, rivers, islands, deserts. Every known region of the ancient world was marked in careful detail. Athena studied the western horizon. Then she noticed something. A tiny symbol, almost invisible, a flame. It appeared far beyond the known borders of Greece. beyond the western sea, beyond the lands most mortals had ever explored. Hermes stepped beside her. "Well," he smiled, "that looks like my kind of journey." Zeus looked toward the others. For the first time in countless ages, the Olympian gods faced a mystery that had nothing to do with war, revenge, or power. It was a mystery about themselves, and somewhere beyond the western horizon, an ancient fire was waiting. Waiting for the gods who had forgotten it. Waiting for 7 memories to become one. And perhaps waiting for something else to wake with them. The decision was made before the morning had fully awakened. The first hearth had been waiting somewhere beyond the western horizon for longer than any living memory could measure. And now, for the first time, the gods of Olympus knew where they needed to go. Not for war, not for conquest, not because an enemy had threatened their kingdom. They were going because they wanted to remember. The great halls of Olympus slowly filled with the soft sounds of preparation. Hermes gathered maps and scrolls. Poseidon studied the western sea. Demeter brought bread, dried fruit, and herbs for the journey. Artemis prepared a small bundle of supplies for the road. Apollo carried his lyre, as he always did. Hera brought a simple cloak against the evening chill. Athena carried the ancient parchment describing the first hearth. And Hestia carried a small lantern. Inside it burned a single golden flame. She had taken it from the eternal hearth. She did not know why. She simply felt that the flame belonged on the journey. Zeus stood at the edge of the western terrace, looking toward the distant sea. The horizon was clear. Beyond it waited lands none of them had visited together for ages. Hermes joined him. "Ready?" Zeus smiled. "As ready as anyone can be for a journey into a forgotten memory." Hermes laughed quietly. "That sounds complicated. It probably will be." "Good." Hermes adjusted his satchel. "I was beginning to worry this would be a boring morning." The others soon joined them. For a moment the 7 gods stood together, not as rulers, not as legends, simply as companions beginning a journey. Hestia lifted the lantern. Its golden flame flickered gently. Then something extraordinary happened. The flame leaned toward the west. No wind was blowing, yet the tiny light clearly pointed toward the horizon. Athena looked at it carefully. "It knows the way." And so they left Olympus. Their journey began along an ancient mountain road that descended slowly toward the sea. The morning was peaceful. Birds moved through the trees. Wildflowers grew beside the path. The air carried the fresh scent of pine and warm earth. For the first time in centuries, the gods walked together without urgency. They talked. They remembered. They laughed. Hermes told stories from his travels. Demeter pointed out wild herbs growing beside the road. Artemis occasionally stopped to watch birds moving between the branches. Apollo hummed softly as he walked. Even Zeus seemed lighter. The journey itself began to feel like part of the answer. Perhaps they had spent too long believing that being gods meant standing apart from one another. Perhaps the forgotten memory was not about a place at all. Perhaps it was about togetherness. By sunset they reached the coast. The Aegean Sea stretched before them, glowing beneath the fading light. Poseidon stepped toward the water. The waves became completely still. A path appeared across the surface. Not a bridge, not a road, just calm water stretching westward beneath the evening sky. Poseidon smiled. "We can walk." They stepped onto the sea. The water supported their feet as gently as stone. Behind them, Greece slowly disappeared into the distance. Ahead lay only the endless horizon. The moon rose. Stars appeared. The gods continued walking. There was no sound except the gentle movement of water beneath their feet. After several hours, the sea changed. The air became cooler. The stars seemed brighter. Then Athena noticed something. "Look, far ahead, beneath the western sky, a faint golden glow appeared. Everyone stopped. The light was barely visible, but Hestia's lantern responded immediately. Its flame grew brighter. The first hearth was near. They continued toward the light. Eventually, the sea ended. A narrow shore appeared beneath towering cliffs. Beyond the cliffs was a valley hidden from the ordinary world. There were no cities, no temples, no roads, only ancient grass beneath a sky filled with stars. And at the center of the valley stood the mountain from their memories. Athena stopped breathing for a moment. "I remember." The others looked toward her. She smiled softly. "So do I." They entered the valley together. The air felt strangely familiar. Hestia's lantern burned brighter with every step. Then they reached the center of the valley. There it was, the first hearth. A circle of ancient stones surrounded a golden fire. The flame burned exactly as Athena had seen it in her memory. Perfectly still. No smoke, no sparks, no wind, just eternal golden light. The gods stood around it. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Hestia stepped forward. She placed her lantern beside the ancient fire. The two flames touched, and the entire valley became filled with golden light. Memories returned, not one at a time, all at once. They remembered being young. They remembered standing beside this same fire. They remembered learning from one another. Zeus remembered protecting the others. Poseidon remembered the first time he heard the ocean. Demeter remembered touching the earth and feeling life moving beneath it. Hades remembered discovering the quiet realm beneath the world. Hera remembered bringing everyone together. Athena remembered learning that wisdom was not knowing every answer. And Hestia remembered the promise they had made. They had promised that wherever they went, whatever names the world eventually gave them, whatever powers they gained, they would never forget that they had once stood together beside a single fire, a fire that represented home, a fire that belonged to all of them. The memory settled gently into their hearts. No thunder followed, no great explosion. Nothing dramatic happened. The world simply became quiet, and somehow that was enough. The mystery had never been about a hidden weapon. It had never been about an ancient enemy. It had never been about gaining more power. It had been about remembering who they were before the world began telling stories about them. The seven gods stood silently around the first hearth, and for the first time in thousands of years, they remembered. Then the fire began to soften. Its golden light became smaller, gentler, until it looked almost exactly like Hestia's little lantern. She picked it up. The ancient hearth remained behind. It no longer needed them. Its purpose had been fulfilled. The gods turned toward the distant path leading home. Above them, the stars remained perfectly still. The journey back to Olympus would begin at dawn. But tonight, there was nothing left to discover, nothing left to solve. Only the quiet comfort of knowing that the forgotten part of themselves had finally returned. And beneath that ancient sky, beside the fire that had remembered them when they had forgotten themselves, the gods rested. For one peaceful night, they were simply seven friends together at home. The first light appeared beyond the distant mountains, touching the tops of the cliffs with a soft golden glow. The ancient fire remained quiet. Its flames no longer reached toward the heavens. They simply rested within the circle of stones, small and warm, as though the fire itself had finally found peace. The seven gods remained nearby. No one was eager to leave. For thousands of years, they had carried pieces of a memory they could never quite reach. Now that memory had returned, and strangely, it did not make them feel more powerful. It made them feel more peaceful. Athena sat beside the ancient stones, watching the flame. She had expected the truth to feel enormous. Instead, it felt intimate, like remembering the voice of someone you had loved long ago, like returning to a childhood home and recognizing a doorway you had not seen in centuries. She looked at the others. Zeus was standing at the edge of the valley, watching the sunrise. Poseidon sat quietly beside a small stream. Demeter gathered a few wildflowers growing between the stones. Hera rested beneath an old tree. Apollo softly played a few notes upon his lyre. Artemis watched two birds flying across the morning sky. Hestia simply sat beside the fire. Everyone was doing something ordinary, and that was when Athena finally understood. The first hearth had never been a secret meant to make them extraordinary. It existed to remind them that even gods needed ordinary things: a place to rest, someone to return to, a meal shared at the end of a long day, a familiar voice, a warm light in the darkness, a home. Athena smiled. Perhaps that was the greatest secret of the gods. Not their power, not their immortality, but the quiet lives they lived when nobody was watching. The hours spent walking through forests, the afternoons beside the sea, the evenings around a shared table, the moments beside a simple hearth, the laughter that never became part of mythology. Those were the moments that had truly shaped them. Zeus eventually returned to the group. "Are you ready to go home?" Hestia looked at the fire. Then she nodded. Yes. She lifted the small lantern. The ancient flame responded with one final golden flicker. Then it became still. The gods began their journey back. They crossed the hidden valley beneath the morning sun. The landscape looked different now, not because it had changed, because they had. The mountain no longer seemed mysterious. The ancient stones no longer seemed frightening. Everything simply felt familiar. At the edge of the valley, Athena stopped. She turned around one last time. The first hearth was already becoming difficult to see. Mist had begun settling between the hills. Soon the valley would disappear again. Perhaps no mortal would ever find it. Perhaps that was exactly as it should be. Some places were meant to remain quiet. Some memories were meant to belong only to those who had lived them. Athena turned and continued walking. By afternoon, they reached the sea. Poseidon stepped into the water. The waves opened gently before him. The journey across the ocean was peaceful. No storms appeared. No monsters rose from the depths. The sea simply carried them home. As they walked, Apollo began playing his lyre. The melody was soft, almost like a lullaby. Demeter hummed quietly. Hestia's lantern glowed warmly. Hermes walked ahead, occasionally turning around to make sure everyone was still following. Even Zeus laughed when Hermes pretended to be their guide. For once, no one was in a hurry. The western horizon slowly turned orange, then pink, then violet. The sun disappeared, and the first stars appeared. Eventually, the familiar outline of Greece emerged from the darkness. Mount Olympus stood far beyond the coast. Its snowy peaks reflected the moonlight. Home. When they finally reached the mountain, the gods did not immediately return to their palaces. Instead, they gathered around Hestia's hearth. The eternal flame was waiting for them. Hestia placed the small lantern beside it. The two flames seemed to recognize one another. Then the lantern went dark. The ancient memory had returned to where it belonged. The gods sat together. No ceremony, no speeches, no celebration, just warmth. Zeus looked around the room. "I think we forgot something else." Hermes raised an eyebrow. "What now?" Zeus smiled. "That we don't have to make everything into a great story." Everyone laughed softly, and perhaps that was the most human thing the gods had ever done. They simply sat together. The night grew deeper. One by one, they began returning to their homes. Apollo carried his lyre. Artemis returned toward the forests. Demeter went back to her quiet fields. Poseidon descended toward the sea. Aphrodite disappeared into her flower gardens. Dionysus returned to his peaceful vineyard. Hades continued his quiet watch below. Athena returned to her library. Hermes finally rested his traveling sandals. Hera closed the doors of her palace, and Hestia remained beside the fire. She watched the flames dance gently. For the first time in thousands of years, she remembered exactly where they had begun. Not as rulers, not as legends, but as 7 souls gathered around a fire. And perhaps that was enough. Outside, Olympus became silent. The moon climbed higher. The stars shimmered above the sleeping mountain. The eternal hearth continued to glow, warm, steady, peaceful. And somewhere deep inside each god, the forgotten memory remained, not as a mystery anymore, but as a quiet feeling, the feeling of being home. And as the night grew softer, Olympus finally surrendered to sleep. The night had become completely still. Across Mount Olympus, the last sounds of the day slowly disappeared. The fountains whispered beneath the moonlight. The gardens rested beneath silver shadows. The ancient olive trees moved gently in the cool breeze. And inside the homes of the gods, warm lights began to fade one by one. The journey was over. The mystery had been answered. And now, there was nothing left to do. For the first time in a very long time, the gods could simply rest. Hestia remained beside her eternal hearth. The golden fire moved gently before her. She watched the flames without thinking about the past. She did not need to. She remembered, and that was enough. She thought about the first hearth far beyond the western sea, the ancient valley, the 7 young figures, the promise they had made. But she also thought about something simpler, the bread waiting on the table, the warm room, the familiar voices of those she loved. Perhaps a home was not defined by walls. Perhaps it was defined by the people who made you feel safe enough to rest. Hestia smiled. She gently added another piece of wood to the fire. The flames rose, then settled, warm, steady, quiet. In another part of Olympus, Athena closed the final scroll of the evening. Her library was silent. Thousands of ancient stories rested upon the shelves. Wars, heroes, kings, monsters, gods. But tonight, Athena did not want to read another story. She walked toward the balcony and looked at the stars. She thought about the lesson the first hearth had given her. Wisdom was not always discovering something new. Sometimes, wisdom was remembering something important that had been forgotten. She closed her eyes. The cool night breeze moved gently through her hair. For a moment, she heard the distant sound of Apollo's lyre. Then it disappeared. Athena smiled. She returned inside, and finally allowed herself to sleep. Far below Olympus, Poseidon rested within his underwater palace. The ocean was calm. Moonlight filtered through the surface in long silver ribbons. Fish moved slowly through the quiet gardens. Sea turtles drifted peacefully through the blue darkness. Poseidon stood beside a window overlooking the deep sea. He thought about the first hearth. For thousands of years, he had believed the sea was his greatest kingdom. Tonight, he understood something different. The sea was not something he possessed. It was something he belonged to. Just as the earth belonged to Demeter, the sky belonged to Zeus, the hearth belonged to Hestia, and the quiet depths belonged to Hades. They were not separate worlds. They were parts of one world. Poseidon smiled. Then he turned away from the window. The ocean continued moving gently outside, and the god of the sea finally rested. In the fields of Greece, Demeter walked beneath the moonlight. The wheat moved softly in the night breeze. She stopped beside the oldest tree in her orchard. Its leaves shimmered silver beneath the stars. She placed one hand upon its trunk. The tree was alive, quietly alive. She could feel the movement of sap beneath the bark. She could feel roots stretching deep into the earth. And she understood the same truth she had known for ages. Life did not need to hurry. Seeds took time. Trees took time. Harvests took time. Even memories took time. Some things became beautiful precisely because they were allowed to grow slowly. Demeter smiled. Then she walked home. The fields remained peaceful behind her. In the forest, Artemis watched the moon rise above the trees. A young deer rested nearby. An owl called softly from a distant branch. The forest seemed endless, yet Artemis no longer felt alone within it. She understood that solitude and loneliness were not the same. There was peace in being surrounded by living things. She listened to the wind, to leaves, to distant streams, to the soft movements of creatures settling down for the night. The forest was telling its own quiet story. Artemis listened, and eventually she closed her eyes. In the garden of Aphrodite, roses moved gently beneath the moon. Their fragrance filled the night air. A pair of doves slept beneath the leaves. The fountains continued their soft, endless song. Aphrodite walked slowly through the garden one final time before resting. She thought about everything the gods had remembered. They had searched for an ancient fire, but perhaps the fire had never truly disappeared. It had remained inside them, in kindness, in friendship, in love, in every shared meal, every welcome, every gentle touch, every person waiting for someone to return home. She looked at the sleeping doves, then smiled. Love did not always need grand declarations. Sometimes, love was simply staying. She returned to her home. The garden became silent. In the vineyard below the mountain, Dionysus had already fallen asleep beneath the ancient plane tree. The evening gathering was over. Empty cups rested upon the wooden table. A few grape leaves had fallen onto the ground. The lanterns burned low. There was nothing left to celebrate. And yet, the night itself felt like a celebration, because everyone had returned home safely, because the harvest was growing, because the stars were visible, because tomorrow would come. Dionysus smiled in his sleep. The vineyard remained beneath the moon, quiet, safe, peaceful, and far below all of them, Hades walked beside the silent river. The underworld was calm. Cypress trees moved gently in the unseen breeze. The pale flowers of the meadow glowed beneath the blue darkness. Cerberus slept beneath his tree. Hades stopped beside the river. He looked toward the distant horizon. He thought about the first hearth. Perhaps more than any of the others, he understood its meaning. Everything eventually returned somewhere. Travelers returned home. Rivers returned to the sea. Seeds returned to the earth. The sun returned each morning. And even memories, after thousands of years, could return. Hades smiled quietly. Then he continued walking. There was no need to hurry. There never had been. Eventually, every light on Olympus disappeared, except one, the eternal flame of Hestia. It continued burning beside the sleeping mountain. Its golden glow reached gently across the room. Outside, the moon moved slowly toward the western horizon. The stars remained bright. The world below was asleep. Villages rested. Ships drifted quietly in distant harbors. Fields waited beneath the dew. Forests breathed beneath the darkness. The sea moved against the shore. Everything had become still, and somewhere inside that stillness, the gods were sleeping too, not as powerful rulers, not as figures from ancient legends, but simply as beings who had spent another long day together. They had walked, they had listened, they had remembered, they had returned home, and perhaps that was what their hidden lives had always been about. Not the thunder, not the battles, not the magnificent temples, but the quiet moments between them. The mornings when they walked through empty gardens, the afternoons beside the sea, the evenings around a shared table, the nights beside a warm fire, the small moments nobody wrote about, the moments that made immortality feel almost ordinary. The eternal hearth continued to glow. Its flame moved gently, slowly, peacefully, like a small golden breath in the darkness. And as the final hours of night passed over Olympus, the ancient mountain seemed to whisper one final secret. Even gods need a place to rest. Even gods need someone to come home to. And even the oldest memories can find their way home. The moon disappeared beyond the horizon. The sky slowly began to brighten. A faint line of gold appeared in the east. Morning was coming, but for now, there was still darkness, still silence, still warmth, and still sleep. So let Olympus remain quiet for a little longer. Let the gods rest beneath the stars. Let the ancient stories fade softly into the distance, and let the eternal hearth continue to burn, steady, warm, and peaceful, until another morning begins.